I'm happy to be able to speak to you this morning. We have a show for you today. The entire show is dedicated to all things Trayvon, as we are calling it. I am here and pleased to be more than ably assisted by Dr. Julianne Malveaux. Dr. Malveaux, thank you so much for co-hosting the Rock Newman Show today.
Well,
we branded it Rock and the Doc. And we invite you to stay tuned, tell your friends what we're doing here. We really are looking to explore all aspects of the Trayvon Martin tragedy. We could start any number of places. Before we get into discussing the Trayvon Martin tragedy today, let me just tell you, we have a very interesting panel of guests. Donnie Bravo Brown will be joining us. He is a recent graduate of Howard University, and he is coming to us to speak from the heart as a young African American. 21 years old, Donovan might be 22, but as a young African American, just to speak about what it means to be a young African American in America today. We also have Janks Morton joining us. Janks Morton is a filmmaker who have produced films. One of his films is What Black Men Think. Another one is called Hoodwinked, and we're happy to have him. In the 10 o'clock hour, we're going to have conservative Republican author, radio TV personality, entrepreneur, Armstrong Williams, who has written extensively about this case, has opined on it. Some in the African American community find his comments to be controversial. And here at the Rock Newman Show at Busboys and Poets, we are open to dialogue from all sides to continue to strive to do what we can to make the place a better world to live in, one day and one person at a time. And then in the third hour, we're going to have former TV journalist and mayoral candidate Leo Alexander. Leo is just a Facebook entrepreneur, if you will. His opinions are often shared and often responded to by many. So we have a very interesting show today as we try to discuss and make sense out of this whole matter. And Julianne, as we try to make sense of the Trayvon Martin tragedy, let's not start at the beginning, but let's start with yesterday. President Barack Hussein Obama, in what was a surprise to the most experienced journalists, came into the press room and spoke for 18 minutes in a very eloquent and personal manner about many things. Primarily, as it was described in one analysis that I saw this morning, part of what he was doing was explaining to white America, like no other president has been able to do, what it means to be black in America, while acknowledging that there are such great divides in terms of how the majority, or many, white Americans view this trial as having race doesn't have anything to do with it, and how blacks view the trial that race had everything to do with it. And I thought that he struck a great balance.
You know, to me, it was a wonderful speech. We didn't expect it at all. When he spoke earlier, he said the jury has spoken, and he left it at that. And that was, to me, an inadequate response. When he came back and said, I could have been Trayvon 35 years ago, that really made it very personal. It suggested, as he said, he didn't know very many black men who had not had this following experience. So it seems to me that he attempted to explain to white folks how black folks feel and what we've experienced, which many do not believe we've experienced. Now, from a Gallup poll earlier this week, it said that fewer African Americans than 20 years ago feel that they've been discriminated against. Fewer. That's probably the younger set. But as I always tell the younger set, wait till it happens to you.
Right.
And, as our brother from Howard University comes up, I think we'll hear from him, how this happens so often. Wrong car, wrong side of the street, new car, whatever. I'll tell you, Rock, I have a 29-year-old nephew, and he's had stories upon stories. Well, he's 6'5" and wears about a size 17 shoe. So some people believe he's just intimidating because he breathes. And sometimes he wears dreadlocks, and sometimes he wears his afro out to here. But some of the stories that he tells me are harrowing.
Yeah.
He, one occasion, was trying to tape, he's an aspiring journalist, among other things, comedian, trying to tape a helicopter landing in his neighborhood. The police told him to give up the camera. He wouldn't do it. The next thing he knows, face on the ground, handcuffed, and he's told he's being held for suspicion of a robbery that happened 4 blocks ago, even though they saw him come out of his house. The person who was robbed, there were footprints outside, size 9 shoe. Now, this boy could put his head into a size 9 shoe.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of thing that happens, and almost every black man, regardless of age, has that kind of story and status.
And the esteemed Washington Post journalist, Richard Cohen, he wrote this week a column where I looked at it because I didn't want to misquote what he wrote.
It was downright insulting, but let me correct you on one thing. Richard Cohen is not a journalist. Richard Cohen is an opinionator, and I think that's important to essentially point out. He is not reporting the facts. He's reporting what he feels about the facts. And if we go back and look at his columns from Affirmative Action to Urban Decay to anyone else, his anti-black bias is out there. So, this was not a surprise.
He pretended to try to give some balance to the piece that he wrote. but at the end, he could not resist saying that Trayvon Martin was justifiably suspicious.
Which is
and just in the most fundamental form. Why is a skinny 17-year-old kid that has a can of soda or tea in his pocket or in his hand and some Skittles, why is that kid justifiably, why would anyone term that kid as justifiably suspicious?
And a skinny kid, the president addressed that as well when he said, what if Trayvon was of an age and was armed?
Flip the script.
Would he be able to shoot George Zimmerman because he felt threatened with a car following him? The Cohen column really reflects the fear of black intelligence, fear of a black planet, fear of demographic shifts. When you look at that column and you look at sort of the Limbaugh talking points and a bunch of these other people, they are attempting to make justifications. But, Rock, the defense put on a much better case than the prosecution did, in my opinion. And the gauntlet was thrown down when they had the white woman on the stand who talked about black people trying to break into her house, and she had her baby on her breast, and she's hiding in the closet with her rusty scissors. I mean, give me a break. And then Zimmerman came to help her out. And so that's when, the big fear always, which is unspoken, but we know back to the 19th and early 20th centuries that all you had to do was look at a white woman and you're lynched. So, this woman makes this pitiful white woman case, and suddenly, I really think that was a gauntlet. And race was not used.
Yeah.
But it was implicitly used.
Yeah, and that's a big point. It's a big point, and I think what was a detriment in the prosecution's case, that it was too timid to make it what it was. And so I think that there was, in a worst case scenario, on the prosecutorial side, there was malpractice in a worst case scenario. If you want to be generous, you'll say that they weren't sensitive enough to understand or courageous enough to commit that there was an issue of race there. Now, so therefore, his white the white prosecutors were too timid, not courageous enough to introduce it, or too insensitive and not understanding. Well, and any way you cut that, there was faulty prosecution from that perspective.
Even more than that, you could see the poor prosecutorial preparation of the witnesses. From the Asian gentleman who was the medical examiner, he was not well prepared. He's sitting there flipping through his notes and all that. Someone should have, they have these jury consultants, they have other consultants. He should have been better prepared. If he needed notes, he shouldn't have had to flip through them.
Right.
Also, Rachel Jenrette, you know, who has shown up on television as much more friendly and other things than she did at the trial, but she too should have been prepped.
Yeah.
And she wasn't. I mean, the prosecution has the right to prep their witnesses. Rock, one of the things, you've got a great show lined up today, and I would just say to you as a sister that one of the things that's missing here is the voices of black women.
Yeah.
So, you know, because there's a concept I call the third burden, which is that African American women experience racism, we experience sexism, but then we experience the treatment of black men.
Yeah.
I mean, Sabrina Fulton is the one who's had the public face of dignity.
Yes.
Rachel Jenrette is the one who was Trayvon's friend who last spoke to him. So women have a piece on this too. When my nephew gets in trouble, he calls Aunt Julianne.
Yeah.
Even though he has mom and other stuff, but he knows who's gonna kind of talk to him in a certain way. When our men are incarcerated, we have the burden of going to visit them in prison, even though they've made this very difficult. You know, many of the prisons who are in rural areas, you know, just go see Mumia Abu Jamal from Philly takes you 3 different kinds of transportation. And we know that one of the greatest deterrents to recidivism is to maintain family connections. So a lot of brothers are being set up, but the ones who basically carry a part of that burden is African American women. So we need to hear, I want to hear the brothers' voices because I think they're really important, but I think we also have to bear in mind that this is not a black male issue.
Yeah.
You know, it's a African American community issue.
Yeah. I talked the other night about a close friend of mine that was at a party when she heard the verdict, having a great time. She's got a 20-year-old daughter and a 15-year-old son, and she could not stay at the party. She knew that her son was there at the house. As a matter of fact, both kids were at the house, and she left the party. She went home, and this is a young lady that has lupus. She made a pallet. He was asleep. Her 15-year-old son was asleep. She made a pallet and slept in his room on the floor from that sense of protection and understanding that her 15-year-old son was Trayvon Martin, that having that sense of vulnerability. The other thing is, we tried this week. There's a very interesting story that has unfolded in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Yep.
There's a 15-year-old young man. Tamar Boggs is his name. There was a little 5-year-old white girl that was kidnapped in his neighborhood. He saw cops and a whole bunch of other folks there. He and some friends, he and a friend got on a car, and he said in his gut, I spoke with him. I spoke to his mom. We were making efforts to try to get them here, and they just could not work it out. But I wanted both he and his mom to come here to do, as you said, to in part give a female voice to this issue, but also juxtapose Tamar Boggs, who chased this car all through the streets, so much so until the guy who had picked this girl up, who now has been charged, but he was initially, when I first started talking to them, being held on a Megan's Law violation in that he had moved into the Lancaster neighborhood and hadn't registered as a previous sex offender. Through the efforts of Tamar Boggs, who could be Trayvon Martin, a little 5-year-old white girl is alive today that more than likely would have been dead if it had not been for Tamar Boggs. So I say that as a voice, in part, I think what Obama was trying to do was to say to the white community, look beyond, and to everyone, look beyond your natural bias. Search within yourself to see whether or not you're stretching yourself to be open and to be less biased. This time has gone by so fast, we got to take a quick break, and we'll come back with the rest of the show. Today, from Busboys and Poets, July the 20th, 2013. I am Rock Newman from the Rock Newman Show. I want to tell you about the MGM Grand National Harbor, the most exciting project to come to the District, Maryland, or Virginia in quite some time. You're going to have great fun. Come on down, support this project with all you have. It is going to be wonderful for the area. We're going to increase our tax base. We're going to get funding for the police department, for ambulance, for fire, for education. It is really a project that is going to benefit our area. Folks, we want to support in a very strong DMV kind of way this great project from the MGM Grand National Harbor.
Nissan and Pohanka Hyundai. It's hard to be down on your luck when you're Virginia's first choice for new Nissan and Hyundais, but I need to sell 60 cars this week. Right now, I'll pay you big bucks for your good luck. Bring down any good luck charm you've got, and based on the sale price of the car you choose, I'll give you up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car this week. Today, your lucky penny is worth plenty, up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car you want. Stop moping and hoping you'll get approved. With my For the People credit approval process, the banks are looking to get lucky and lend to you, even if you've been turned down before. Bring me any good luck charm and I'll give you up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car today. Hurry, once I get rid of 60 cars, the luck runs out. All offers require bank approval, so call us at 1-800-POHANKA, visit Pohanka Nissan and Pohanka Hyundai on Route 1 in Fredericksburg, or better yet, log on to TimPohankaForThePeople.com. And when we make a deal, I promise it'll be your lucky day. I'm Tim Pohanka, and I'm a leprechaun for the people.
Just
Welcome back to the Rock Newman Show today, Saturday, July the 20th, 2013. Joining us for this segment is esteemed filmmaker Jenks Morton. Jenks Morton is a filmmaker that has made some very relevant, thought-provoking art work. And I recently saw a C-SPAN interview That was a very impressive segment. James, welcome to the Rock Newman Show.
Thanks for having me, and it's good to be here on a Saturday morning.
Yes. You have two films again that you've made, Hoodwinked and What Black Men Think. Just before we delve into that and get your thoughts on all things Trayvon, I want to come back to Julianne, because Julianne, it is not, oftentimes when you think about black folks being profiled, it is not just black men that are profiled.
No.
You know, that's not the exclusivity. Men don't have an exclusivity on that.
Now, the profiling of black men very frequently has much more dire consequences because black women are not as threatening as black men are. However, I can tell you from personal experience in terms of having been a college president that a lot of parties that young women have had, both at Bennett College, at North Carolina A&T State University, the noise too loud, the police bust in, they don't care who it is, and they begin their ridiculous response. In one case, senior students simply having we're graduating party with pizza and, maybe they have a little beer, but, some of them are 21 years old, so it's not against the law. Police bust in because there's too much noise, and the next thing you know, students are on the floor being handcuffed. One young lady had a laceration on her face. Literally, 2 days before graduation, her parents are coming from LA. Why did the police do it? They wouldn't do it at Greensboro College, which is predominantly white. Why did they do it there? Because these were young black women who were perceived as dangerous. In another horrible case, the pizza man, I don't know why the pizza men are always involved in this, but the pizza man delivered the pizza to some people who didn't pay.
Yeah.
He gave the wrong apartment number. He transposed the digits. So they bust into somebody's home where two young ladies are fast asleep, make them not walk out but crawl out of their apartment with their underwear on. Basically,
That's terribly dehumanizing.
Crawl. Totally humiliating them. But while we talk about all things Trayvon, we want to look at what's happening with African American men. I think we also want to understand the profiling of black women. Rachel Jenrette was profiled. The way that she was treated and the way that the blogosphere talked about this young sister, she speaks 5 languages, but English is not her first language. So you have people talk about her attitude. Quite frankly, she didn't have to be as rude to the prosecution as she was. But on the other hand, she's a teenager. You ask her the same question 5 times. Yeah. At some point, you're going to say, what you talking about, fool? And she didn't say that. So I just want us to keep, the brother piece is important, but it's a community piece, and women are part of the community.
Yeah. If I might weigh in just for a second on Rachel Gentile, I would suggest that anyone put themselves as being a 19-year-old who was very dear friends with someone that is deceased, that person you're the last person that person talks to, and at 19, you put yourself in the eye of a storm in that manner. You've got your nervousness, you're intimidated. I mean, the best of us under those circumstances don't necessarily always, come across in the most graceful manner. And so I think that the profiling of her and the criticism from majority white media, I'm going to say, but I'm also going to say... But also
some of us.
Huh? Yeah.
Some of us who were really out of order.
And that's what I feel really strong. I feel strongly about both. But that is shameful. That was absolutely shameful.
Some of the African Americans, especially African American women who talked about her, were basically in that setback period back in the day where every black person represented us, and if any black person did not reflect our own sense of sensibility, then somehow that was wrong. I mean, they talked about her for being dark-skinned, they talked about her hairstyle. Right. It just was really ridiculous. And the prosecution attorneys, not prosecution, the defense attorneys were horrible. Yeah. That Don West, basically should be caged. Yeah. That's what his behavior was like. And then Mr. O'Mara, who was also on the ignorant side, quite frankly, with the smugness in the post-verdict press conferences. It lets you know what she was up against.
Yeah. James Morton. What do black men think? Have we been hoodwinked?
I was thinking as you guys are giving this diatribe, because what I deal with is the castigation of black identity. So take stereotypes, misperceptions, even internally or externally from the larger white society, and how does that play out? And that ties back into what we're talking about profiling. And I think it rubbed us all the wrong way. I really, at this juncture in my career, am not too concerned, or not overly concerned about the larger white society. I'm concerned about how we feel about ourselves, heart, mind, and soul. And what they did to Rachel, we did to her, was abominable that we look down the nose, or down the barrel of our nose at one of our own because we want to conform to some, academic, idealistic monolith
standard
of black identity,
on and on and on.
It's unfair, unrighteous, and unholy at this juncture in black culture.
Yes.
And then to take these things and how we have inculcated this message of less than, not equal to, or not good enough internally, black people, and just push each other down. So the thing that kind of puts me on the roadmap all the time is that question, are there more black men in jail or in college? And that's part of this narrative. How do we feel about ourselves? How do we feel about each other? How do these larger white constructs get in the way of us connecting significantly with one another? And I think then you can tie that back into the Trayvon issue of how he has fallen victim to this castigation of black identity, which allows him to be stereotype profiled and then fall victim to this circumstance.
One of the scary things is the way we feel we would acknowledge in our community the racial divide and justice. For example, black folks and white folks smoke marijuana at about the same level.
Yes.
But African Americans are 6 times more likely to be arrested and incarcerated for marijuana use. Now, we would acknowledge that. However, how do we feel then about ex-cons? How do we begin to absorb them back into our community? And you'll see, again, to your point, some of us looking down our nose say, well, they've been to jail. Yeah. Well, you know that a whole lot of us go to jail. A lot of it is justified, but a lot of it is unjustified. So when we begin to refuse to absorb these folks back in our community, we're allowing other people to throw them away. So I would give a shout out, for example, to Councilman Marion Barry, who had a piece of legislation that would have made it illegal to discriminate against someone based on their felon status. Now, of course, if you had your hand in the cookie jar, we're not going to make you a cashier. But you can be hired in some capacity.
Right. Jenks, are there more black men in jail than there are in colleges?
There's
and
never
universities?
been more. I hate that question. I really do. There has never, since the data has been collected, there's never been more African American men in jail, prison, home arrest with the tethers, military institutions, and institutions for the criminally insane. Throw it all together. There's never been more black men in jail than in college. Right. It's a myth. There was a large.
Where does the myth come from, though?
It came from an organization called the Justice Policy Institute, who did a very, very, again, I hate to use this word, but it's an abominable study where they basically took just the fall enrollment of African American men in college and then compared it to an entire year of incarcerates. So it was unfair, 2 different sample groups, but of course the media doesn't care about that. They picked up on this arc, and this came out in 2002, and it's just...
And it is a narrative.
Yeah, it is.
It is a narrative that creates a sense of comfort for some justification for discrimination.
And the majority media has absorbed it as if it's fact, and I haven't seen anyone, as you put it, break it down.
No, I did.
But I was just saying I haven't seen others. I mean, I taught a class a bazillion years ago called You Can Lie with Statistics. Because you actually can. I mean, and that's a case of lying with statistics.
Yeah. Right. Misrepresentation in order to service an agenda. Now, the Justice Policy Institute, their advocacy is around the reentry or reducing the recidivism rate and incarceration rates. I get that. But too often in this conversation, those people, I will never argue with the mass incarceration of African Americans. It just is what it is. It's been like that for about 50 years. However, they like to juxtapose that issue against other groups, which denigrates that group's achievements. So when you compare jail to college, you're denigrating the college. They denigrate slavery. There's more African American men in prisons and probation than were in slavery. Right now, the new narrative is that there's more black men in jail than were in apartheid South Africa. These are true stats, but the sample groups should never be put side by side, and it does a disservice to these other groups. The mass incarcerate issue could stand on its own. It really could, without having to.
As we have found our voice, is trying to find the good and to celebrate it. We had a show Thursday night celebrating the 95th birthday of Nelson Mandela. I brought up Tamar Boggs in again, juxtaposing him to talking about all things Trayvon, because it was a story of a hero, a kid that if he had not been doing that, a few moments later, perhaps that little girl's parents would have walked down the street and crossed the street when he was coming. Or they might have flipped their doors down. He, a young black man, saved their little white daughter because he's human, and there is a humanity that is too often goes unrecognized in the African American community.
But I wonder if these parents, having had this young black man save their daughter, if it shifted their racial attitudes at all, or if it's just this happened this time. Also, you wonder, Tamar Boggs deserves national headlines. He and his mom should have been on CNN the next day. This should have been a New York Times headline. But all too often, when you look at our community, we're either invisible, inferior, or exceptional. Invisible, you just don't see us. Inferior, everybody will tell the story, as you say, of the folks in jail. And exceptional, of course, everybody's going to put Oprah Winfrey or Danny Glover on the cover. But what about Tamar Boggs? I mean, if we're talking about crisis in the interpretation of the lives of black men, this is a celebration.
And I want to take a kind of dovetail from that as a filmmaker that, white audiences don't come to black films. And it's because they lack empathy. And this is going to tie into what the president was saying yesterday as well. They do not understand the lens of our experience. And they cannot empathize with it, so they can't identify with it. So Tamar Boggs, his humanity is acknowledged, but his blackness is not. And it has to stay off the table in order to kind of keep these racial constructs of racism in place. So the challenge for us is to begin, how do we begin to navigate and negotiate a system that is not empathetic to our experience today, very, very dismissive of our history, and then how do we uplift ourselves irregardless of what they have to say about us. And that's a tough because too often we use the barometer of white identity to measure black success or failure, which I believe is a mistake. That other groups, i.e. Asians, i.e. Hispanics, come and do not establish how good or how bad they are by the barometer of another ethnicity. And I think as we move away from that narrative of if it ain't white, it ain't right, if we move away back and say that the greatness of blackness is claimed within itself, exclusively from these other groups, we can begin to ascend. And these messages of Tamar, these messages of, I forget his name, but out of Cleveland, one who found the girl who had been in.
Charles Ramsey.
Ramsey.
He was here.
Yeah. Wow. That we begin to push that as who we are, regardless of what these larger constructs say about us.
The other piece is our history.
Julianne, we
out of time,
run up against that clock.
Okay.
And
thanks for having me.
And be back in just a moment on the Rock Newman Show live at Busboys and Poets.
Tim Pohanka from Pohanka Nissan and Pohanka Hyundai. It's hard to be down on your luck when you're Virginia's first choice for new Nissan and Hyundais, but I need to sell 60 cars this week. Right now, I'll pay you big bucks for your good luck. Bring down any good luck charm you've got, and based on the sale price of the car you choose, I'll give you up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car this week. Today, your lucky penny is worth plenty, up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car you want. Stop moping and hoping you'll get approved. With my For the People credit approval process, the banks are looking to get lucky and lend to you, even if you've been turned down before. Bring me any good luck charm and I'll give you up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car today. Hurry, once I get rid of 60 cars, the luck runs out. All offers require bank approval, so call us at 1-800-POHANKA, visit Pohanka Nissan and Pohanka Hyundai on Route 1 in Fredericksburg, or better yet, log on to TimPohankaForThePeople.com. And when we make a deal, I promise it'll be your lucky day. I'm Tim Pohanka, and I'm a leprechaun for the people.
Everybody, I'm Rock Newman from The Rock Newman Show, and I am absolutely flattered to have as one of my fine advertisers the DMV's greatest corporate citizen. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about the Pohanka Automotive Group. If you have any automotive needs whatsoever, if you want to sell your car, buy a car, trade in your car, have your car serviced, whatever you need, see my good friends at the Pohanka Automotive Group. You will be well taken care of, I promise. I'm Rock Newman. I might be there. Come on down and see our good friends at Pohanka Automotive Group.
Make sure that's welcome back, folks, to the Rock Newman Show. We're joined in this segment by a young man who came as a representative, if you will, of simply young black men. He's a recent graduate of Howard University. His name is Donovan Brown. He goes by the stage name in his artistic world of Donnie Bravo. Still with us here and co-hosting for the entire show today is the highly esteemed Dr. Julianne Malveaux. Donovan Brown, welcome to the Rock Newman Show.
Good morning, Rock.
Today is the Rock and Doc Show.
All right.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Black men.
Mm-hmm.
In more trouble today than in past times, or just about the same? How do you view it today? You know, just talk to us about the Trayvon Martin trial, how that makes you feel, what your connection is to the tragedy.
All right. First of all, I want to say that I don't know if it's better or if it's worse. I think there's a war going on right now. I think it's a war of perception. And as a black male, like throughout the whole thing, I made a lot of observations in terms of where we are, race in America. I think that it's important that we take a step back, not just black America, but America totally. And I just think that we have to add like the human element into the whole equation. I think they see us not as human, and I don't think there's a compassion there that looks at us as equal.
Donnie, tell me, when you say they see us,
white Americans,
okay,
yeah,
okay,
yeah, white Americans. You know, for instance, some of the members of the jury. I was watching the interview with Anderson Cooper, and the fact that she really could sit there and say that she didn't think race played a part demonstrated to me that the lens with which they view this world is really off base and off kilter and just not the same as ours at all. And I think that she really truly didn't see Trayvon as even possibly being a victim. It just wasn't. It wasn't
right.
a possibility.
Yeah. Her preconceived notion,
that
was bias.
Yeah,
what I would say is
that she didn't even know that she had.
Yeah.
Yeah, but she said he could have run. She made the point he could have avoided this. Well, he's walking down the street.
Yeah.
What is he supposed to avoid by walking down the street?
Right.
I mean, the person who could have avoided it is the person who was told to stay in his car.
Let me deal with this what I think is a real thread of bias in many folks in white America who some don't know they have it. You got some folks that are just out there evil and think that talked about the Bible and ham and that black folks is cursed and supposed to be cursed and all the rest. Mm-hmm. You got some out there just like that, some fire breathers. But I think that there are some, and I want to use this example. I've used it in the past, and oftentimes it is never acknowledged when I am talking to my white brothers and sisters, to my white friends. But I give this example that hockey and basketball both have rules that strictly forbid fighting. Mm-hmm. It's a majority of white folks that attend professional basketball games and majority of white folks that attend professional hockey games. When two brothers get upset with each other and start to throw down, and you might see a little bit of blood or somebody shoved to the floor, they are reported and talked about for days on end afterwards as those thugs, those animals, those folks that need to be in jail.
That could not control themselves.
That could not control themselves. Now, rules say don't fight in basketball, so I'm not condoning it. I'm just saying what happens. In hockey, they can't wait until a fight breaks out, teeth are knocked out, blood, snot is flying, and they cheer their courageous gladiators. Now, why is this? It is because they see themselves and they see someone else, and they have this preconceived idea, this bias, that those black people are that way and we are this way. We are courageous. And you know what? I've never had anyone agree with me. I've never had any of my white friends really to acknowledge it. They can't get there.
Yeah. They'll get there, I think, once they get enough black players dominating hockey. I guarantee you. I guarantee you see the rules change. No, seriously.
What a great comment. Let me say one more thing, Donnie. I want to give you the floor. But just this week, Tavis Smiley stopped Bill O'Reilly in his tracks. Ben O'Reilly, a big NRA guy. Hey, Second Amendment, all should be armed. And they were talking about Trayvon. And at some point, Tavis Smiley somewhat facetiously said, well, perhaps all black people should be armed. And Bill O'Reilly backed up and said, oh, well, I think you've gone a little too far there.
Yeah, too far, right.
So everybody should be armed except the black people.
Well,
is that his point?
Well, again, that bias of, is there the sense of responsibility that you're able to be armed?
See, the thing is, like, if you've noticed, whenever there's a shooting or violent occurrence that's covered in the media, like with the level of intensity that the Trayvon Martin thing was, the NRA is the first person to jump up and say, oh, well, if so-and-so had a gun,
yes,
they would be okay.
Right.
Every time you see it happen, a victim of a violent crime that gets a lot of news coverage, the NRA comes out, they make a statement, they get publicity.
Right.
Where were they?
Right.
What happened?
Right. And that's a very fair question. That is a very, very question. Says, okay, why?
Yeah, there's a bias there that says, I mean, just it goes along with the narrative. We can, you can't. You know, whatever it is that says that we're not of, you know, I don't know what the word is to describe it, but there's a sense of, you know, you can't do what we can do. You're not justified or responsible enough to have a firearm. And then what really like got to me and kind of like fueled me to come here was like, I was watching a lot of the news coverage of people on the what they call the right wing. I mean, my dad told me right wing, left wing, same bird. Yeah. But they were saying, you know, how we were bringing up why we were so mad, and I think that's a big thing about why Obama spoke. His words that he spoke yesterday was to kind of articulate and explain to those who didn't understand. This is why we're mad. This is the lens that we view this case with. This is the lens that we view our history with, and this is why we had the reaction that we had. And then I see a lot of people. A guy by the name of David Webb being one of them, that return and have a rebuttal of the black-on-black crime statistics. But my question to them is that just a talking point? Like, where was your concern with black-on-black crime last week? Yeah. Or is it just a talking point to make a rebuttal, you know, on our
angle? It's a talking point. Yeah. It's, you know, if they want to be concerned about black-on-black crime, they need to be concerned about black poverty. Yes. They need to be concerned about the condition of schools, and a number of other things. You know, one of the other things I want to just lift up quickly is the history of laws that prevented black people from even owning guns. So we were never placed in a position to be able to defend ourselves historically. In some southern states, you could even have a certain amount of money. So someone could take your your money. So, historically, we've been treated as less than, and that continues. I want to just flip the script just a little bit to ask you how you feel about this. Not what the data are, not what the facts are, but for you and the other young brothers who are graduating from Howard and other places, how do you feel when you see a not guilty for Zimmerman?
Honestly, I expected it because I think that the system of white supremacy is so deeply layered that by the time it even got to where it was, that I in terms of the trial, I expected the verdict. I was hurt, not so much by the verdict itself, but by the conversation around it and by the opinions that it brought out of people, which I pretty much knew existed, but that I didn't think were of the level of intensity that they are. And honestly, I mean, I could sit here and tell you that it cut me deeply, the verdict, and it made me want to. But I mean, I've been aware. Like, this just goes along with the same story. I mean, I'm sure you're aware of it. That's been told in this nation's history, and I do, however, think that it can be used in a positive light, and I do appreciate the fact that it brings race up so up front in the conversation that it's hard to run from, to the point where the president has to address it. And I think that's the one good thing that may come out of the
I'll use the phrase again that the devil delivered the message, but it was sent from the divine. The fact that President Obama yesterday came out and spoke about it. Now, a lot of opinions, wide-ranging opinions about his speech. Of course, the right wing are once again accusing him of fanning the flames of racial animus. Some folks are saying that it didn't happen soon enough. And, here's a question. If his speech yesterday is indeed going to make a difference, then there is a question. As it relates to Barack Obama's legacy, the parents that spoke out and said, where's the president on this? Was there a sense that as opposed to jumping on this right away, stepping out there right away, or bringing this conversation up much earlier, for example, there is a question. We don't know the answer to it, but I think it's worth asking. Had he done something like this 2 years ago from the bully pulpit of the office of the president and attempted to do what he did yesterday to sensitize all of us to the issues of race, might that have had an impact in Trayvon Martin not being dead today?
Rock, if he did it 2 years ago, he would not have been reelected. Let's be clear. He has a whole lot of wiggle room now. A lot more than he had in 2000 and let's say 10. Remember, let's not forget that in 2010 he lost to Congress. So while I've been a loving critic of President Obama. I think the economic policies have been wrong, and that's my forte. I think that I'd have done jobs before I did healthcare, but I would give him the first term to basically lay some things out. If he had said anything about race in that first term, look at what they did when he brought Skip Gates and the policeman for the beer summit.
Yeah, and the Philadelphia speech. Right.
So, but the Philadelphia speech was before he was elected. And that gave the majority the sense that he was balancing things on the one hand, on the other hand. On the one hand, on the other hand, you might not have any hands. But
here's what I think. Here's what I think that I don't believe anyone can legitimately argue your point that if he would have said something 2 years ago about race, if he would have tried to, with the most open heart that any Christian could have, talked in the most loving way about healing the racial divide, that he would not have gotten elected. And he wouldn't have gotten elected. Why? Because of race.
Precisely.
Yeah, of course, my thing is, it's as if, I'm not going to say all white Americans, though, but it's as if, any time the president or any other black person of a significant position brings up race, it's like they say, race baiting or you're playing the race card. Like, but the thing about it, there's no card, no magical card that they're pulling out of their pockets that has to be played. Just because you're uncomfortable with the conversation doesn't mean that I'm a race baiter. There is no such thing as that, in my opinion. Like, and it's crazy to me how even some of the black conservatives speak down on Obama and others whenever they speak on race. It's like, how can you tell me when to and what to say when it comes to race? It's like he can't say anything. He can bring up the word race, anything racial. It could be a positive message or what have you. It doesn't matter. If he is talking about race in that position, then it's considered to be race baiting, or he's playing the race card, or I heard yesterday that he was divisive, and nothing he said could be, by anybody of intelligence could be taken as divisive. No. It was the truth, and it may hurt you to know your own history, but that doesn't make it divisive. That just makes it the truth. So.
And he could have gone a lot further, quite frankly. I mean, if he had lifted up Wilmington riots, 1898, Rosewood, which is the truth, Oklahoma, the burning of Black Wall Street. If he had brought those things up, one might have said, well, you're going too far back in history, but he's talking about now. The other thing on the race card, I mean, you play the hand you're dealt, and we happen to have been dealt the race card. So if, how do you sit up playing bid whist, you got the ace of spades, and you're not supposed to use it? So I mean, we have to play, that's a card that's in our hand, just like every other card is in our hand. And so I wrote a long essay years ago about it, because I resent the notion that we should handicap ourselves. Say, I've been dealt this winning hand, but I'm going to put one of my cards under the table because I don't want to get anybody angry that I'm playing the cards that are in my hand. So you're going to play poker with a 4-card hand. Right. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
Folks, we are out of time for this particular segment. Coming up in the next hour, conservative, Republican, pundit, author, entrepreneur, who I think might have some differences of opinion as what we've expressed here so far. We shall see when you come back to the Rock Newman Show at Busboys and Poets.
It's hard to be down on your luck when you're Virginia's first choice for new Nissan and Hyundais, but I need to sell 60 cars this week. Right now, I'll pay you big bucks for your good luck. Bring down any good luck charm you've got, and based on the sale price of the car you choose, I'll give you up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car this week. Today, your lucky penny is worth plenty, up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car you want. Stop moping and hoping you'll get approved. With my For the People credit approval process, the banks are looking to get lucky and lend to you, even if you've been turned down before. Bring me any good luck charm and I'll give you up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car today. Hurry, once I get rid of 60 cars, the luck runs out. All offers require bank approval, so call us at 1-800-POANKA, visit Pohanka Nissan and Pohanka Hyundai on Route 1 in Fredericksburg, or better yet, log on to TimPohankaForThePeople.com. And when we make a deal, I promise it'll be your lucky day. I'm Tim Pohanka, and I'm a leprechaun for the people.
My baby drives a handcuff.
The weekend is here, and no matter what the weather's like outside, you'll find the deals inside here in the beautiful showroom of the all-new Pohanka Hyundai in Capitol Heights during their giant Markdown Madness sale.
Smart shoppers know that every new Hyundai in Pohanka comes with Hyundai Assurance and America's best 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty. But why don't you tell them about the Markdown sale, Joe?
I'll be happy to, Kim. Folks, shop around on the web, and you'll see lease payments on a new 2013 Elantra GLS at $179 a month. Today at Pohanka Hyundai, $99 a month. That's right, a $99 payment on a brand new Elantra.
And $89 a month on a new 2013 Accent GLS Automatic. How do they do it, Joe?
It must be the volume, Kim. A brand new building, hundreds of new Hyundais, and Pohanka's low payment and easy credit programs are designed to get everybody driving. But you have to get here today. Rush to the giant Markdown Madness sale at exit 13 off the Capitol Beltway.
Pohanka Hyundai, king of the Beltway. All financing for a limited term on approved HMF credit.
My baby drives a handcuff.
Your holder agreed to call in.
No, I don't think so. Folks, welcome back to the Rock Newman Show. Today, Saturday, July the 20th, 2013. We are being, the co-host of today's show is Dr. Julianne Malveaux. We're talking all things Trayvon Martin. We have tagged our tandem today as Rock and the Doc. And Rock and the Doc, we are joined by Armstrong Williams. Armstrong is a renowned Republican, conservative, talk show host, entrepreneur. Armstrong has always been very confident in sharing his opinions, many of which have gone against the traditional grain and thought of the African American community. He's received a lot of praise from some for having the courage to do so, and a lot of criticism from many for doing so. Armstrong Williams, welcome to the Rock Newman Show.
My pleasure to be with Rock and Dr. Malveaux. Both I've known a long time. I'm just honored to share the stage with you guys.
Well, we're happy to have you here, Armstrong. Let's go straight to Trayvon, if we might.
Yeah, all things Trayvon.
Armstrong and I used to spar back in the day about any number of issues. And I remember once, Armstrong, you may have changed your mind about this, but I remember you once saying you had never been racially profiled, you had never been followed. Is that still the case for you?
Never experienced it. It's never been my life experience to this day in my past. And I think it's more of an anomaly. I'm certain I know many people, including my brother, when he's running for a state senate in South Carolina, when he would go to certain neighborhoods, whites refused to shake his hand because they say they would never shake the hand of a black man. So I do know that it exists, but it has not happened in my life. And I don't want to say that every black American in the United States has experienced racism. There could be exceptions. There are always exceptions to every rule and every circumstances in life.
Would you concede that the majority have experienced racism in some way or another?
Absolutely.
Armstrong, and as we talk about all things Trayvon.
Okay.
Did race have anything to do with Trayvon being followed, Trayvon being shot, and the verdict that was rendered in the Trayvon Martin case?
No, I don't think the case was about race, but I do think the case was about profiling. I think when you wear a hood, you're young, you have a certain look. I believe if it had been a young white kid, a young Jewish kid, a young Asian kid dressed the same way, I think that George Zimmerman would have had the same reaction. And I think that was indicative of the fact when the dispatcher tried to get clarification what was the race of the person. He wasn't sure. He said, I think he's black, but he wasn't sure. His idea was that someone had come into his territory that should not be there, and he was going to take the law into his hands.
Do you not, when you look at it in your mind, it not having had anything to do with race, help me understand the woman who was one of the witnesses who talked explicitly about having her home being broken into by two young African Americans. She was put on the stand as a defense witness for Zimmerman to perhaps suggest that his response was entirely reasonable given that this previous crime had occurred. Did that not have anything, at least subtly, to do with race?
You know, listen, In the circumstances of this, it was a very cold night, one of the coldest nights in Florida. Obviously, George Zimmerman was carrying a gun. And listen, I own guns, and guns change you. It gives you a certain bravado. It gives you a certain confidence. It gives you a certain alternative. And the bottom line is that I think that George Zimmerman was a coward. He was afraid. Even in the neighborhood watch, I don't know any neighborhood watch community that allows someone to carry a gun. That is just a no-no. But he carried this gun, and so obviously he was a fearful person. He did not have the confidence. And I think that what happened was that, you know, Trayvon got the best of him. It wouldn't have mattered if you were hitting him, if Rock was hitting him. And I think he reacted the only way he could. He was a coward. Because when we were coming up, we duked it out with our fists. We fought like men. We may have been blooded. We may have had a nose broken. And just like these young black kids who just think they're manly and think they have confidence and courage by pulling out a gun and killing each other. They don't fight like real men, and that's the problem of the day. They're cowardly, and they use a gun. And where I would challenge the gun laws, the last thing that should be in the hand of a young person is a gun, because they're immature, they don't understand it, and they're just not going to fight it out. I think George Zimmerman was a coward, and he pulled the trigger, and he killed this man for no reason at all.
You know, that might be a symptom of United States government policy even, but that's a whole nother issue we'll come back to. But let me come back to whether or not race had anything to do with these. You know, George Zimmerman was, by every standard, a cop wannabe. There had been break-ins in this community. The break-ins that had been reported were break-ins that had been done by African Americans. That's factual. Now, George Zimmerman knew everything that was going on in that community because he was a nosy Rosie. He was running around as a cop wannabe. So he clearly knew that there had been homes broken into. There had been African American homes broken into. And under his breath, but very audible, he said these blanketed blanks always get away. Now, when he says they always get away, he's talking about these African Americans that have come in here. And so the question about whether or not he knew for sure, you know, I would say that is debatable. Very clearly, at some point, he knew. And there's so, you know, I don't want to pretend to try this case here in terms of who's on who or whatever. What I do know, as we discuss all things Trayvon, is that initially the provocateur was George Zimmerman. George Zimmerman, and there is, Trayvon Martin wasn't doing anything wrong. He wasn't doing anything against the law at all. He was minding his business. And Zimmerman approached him, followed him, got out of the car against the instructions of the police authority. So, you know, now, when you hear Juror 37, B37 talk, it truly was as if Trayvon Martin was on trial and not George Zimmerman.
Precisely.
And those things that she was doing, the inflection and the inference in her voice, the empathy that she had for for George Zimmerman that didn't exist for Trayvon Martin. You know, I don't know how you put that in the blender and you come out with anything other than racial bias from that particular juror.
Well, let me just say this. Listen, obviously, the point that you make has merit. He may not have known at the time, because these things move real fast. They really spin out of control. But I think once they got into an altercation and he realized that he was black, then that may have played a role. He may have become enraged, as a matter of fact, and all those things that you talked about came back to him full force. That may have been the case. I wouldn't deny that.
I'm sure President Obama made a speech yesterday. Many conservatives are lambasting him, saying that he's fanning the flames. I'd just like you to weigh in on your thoughts about his speech yesterday. Is it something that you feel he should have done? Should he have not said anything?
I am shocked. It's the first that I've heard that there are those that are lambasting his speech. I actually thought his speech was excellent. I listened to the whole thing. I didn't read a transcript. I watched it live. When he talked about the fact that his children are better than we are, how he looked at how they interact with their friends and the maturity that they show and the trust that they show in each other. When he talked about the fact that when Trayvon and George Zimmerman were fighting each other, either one of them could have been killed. It could have gone either way. I think he was absolutely right. When he talked about the plight and the profiling why Black America is enraged, I thought he was absolutely on point. The fact that he would just walk into the briefing room, unexpected, no notes, no teleprompter, and he spoke from the heart. I thought he had a very balanced approach to it. You could tell that he was moved, but he also said that he respects our jury system. The jury system, a jury of the peers, they examine the evidence, they examine everything, and this is the conclusion that they've come to, and he said we should move on. I don't see how anyone could lambast or take issue with what the president said. What else could he have said?
Well, Armstrong, I would love it if you would take a moment, step back, and offer some constructive criticism to your fellow conservatives. In other words, we've seen, for example, the ridiculing of President Obama. We've seen people use racial symbolism, which I won't even repeat because you know what I'm talking about, caricaturing both the president and the first lady, and even at some point the children. We've seen a member of Congress holler at the president in the middle of a speech, "Shut up."
Call him a liar.
Oh, yeah. We've seen all these things that primarily are coming from the conservative community. I want to know what you think about this and if you can offer these folks some constructive criticism, because you're among the people who say that, you know, all black people should not be Democrats. I've heard you say that before. But how can people embrace conservatism or the Republican Party with this kind of abject racism coming from there?
Listen, obviously, you know, I don't watch Fox News because it's so vitriolic. It's so anti-Obama. Now listen, I am one of the president's harshest critics. I would be a hypocrite if I tried to say I was not. But I don't criticize the president about his race and about his wife and about these petty issues about his birth certificate and whether he's a legitimate citizen. I think it's fair game to criticize the president on the policy, whether it's affordable care, whether it's the immigration policies, whether we should be in Syria, whether we should still be in Afghanistan. I think those are fair issues. But when you start using these caricatures and you make everything about race, I mean, you lose your credibility. And these conservatives, they do go overboard, and sometimes it seems so personal. I was on the Steve Marsberg show this week, and I guess he assumed when we were talking about Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman that I was going to toe a certain line. And while I say yes, I agree with the jury that George Zimmerman should have been acquitted, as the president said, there was reasonable doubt. As he said in his remarks yesterday, I said, but George Zimmerman was a coward. He should have never shot him with a gun. The bottom line, he should have fought him like a man. And he became very upset. I mean, they try to make this into an issue of race. But look, not all conservatives are that way. You always have your nutbags. You have your people who are still locked into the past. And there are people who resent the fact that President Obama was reelected. The bottom line is that, you know, people are, they represent who we are in the larger America. We have everything. You have it in your party. We have it in our party. And so the bottom line is the president is the president. I voted for him the first time. I didn't vote for him the second time because, you know, what he advocates in the White House and in terms of his policy doesn't identify with my business and anything else. But the bottom line is that the conservatives do go too far. They do go overboard. You know, you just have to ignore them because, listen, the bottom line, he's president and he's reelected, despite them.
You know, Armstrong, I think that there wouldn't be such concern if there was the sense that it was just a lunatic fringe. But when you have folks like Ted Cruz and those of his ilk that continue to, you know, fight hard to disenfranchise numbers of people, and we're going to come back in this next segment, and we're going to talk about the bigger picture. We're going to talk about the Supreme Court decision most recently to strike down Section 5, or to gut Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And someone who I know to be your good friend, Clarence Thomas having voted for that. We're going to get into those issues when we come back. Nobody said it was going to be easy today. We'll be back soon on The Rock Newman Show.
I'm flattered to have as one of my fine advertisers the DMV's greatest corporate citizen. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about the Pohanka Automotive Group. If you have any automotive needs whatsoever, if you want to sell your car, buy a car, trade in your car, have your car serviced, whatever you need, see my good friends at the Pohanka Automotive Group. You will be well taken care of, I promise. I'm Rock Newman. I might be there. Come on down and see our good friends at Pohanka Automotive Group.
My baby drives a Pohanka.
The weekend is here, and no matter what the weather's like outside, you'll find the deals inside here in the beautiful showroom of the all-new Pohanka Hyundai in Capitol Heights during their giant Markdown Madness sale.
Smart shoppers know that every new Hyundai in Pohanka comes with Hyundai Assurance and America's best 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty. But why don't you tell them about the Markdown sale, Joe?
I'll be happy to, Kim. Folks, shop around on the web, and you'll see lease payments on a new 2013 Elantra GLS at $179 a month. Today at Pohanka Hyundai, $99 a month. That's right, a $99 payment on a brand new Elantra.
And $89 a month on a new 2013 Accent GLS Automatic. How do they do it, Joe?
It must be the volume, Kim. A brand new building, hundreds of new Hyundais, and Pohanka's low payment and easy credit programs are designed to get everybody driving. But you have to get here today. Rush to the giant Markdown Madness sale at exit 13 off the Capitol Beltway.
Pohanka Hyundai, king of the Beltway. All financing for a limited term on approved HMF credit.
My baby drives a Pohanka.
Welcome back, folks, to this segment of the Rock Newman Show. I am Rock Newman. My co-host is Dr. Julianne Malveaux, and our friend in studio is Armstrong Williams. Armstrong, again, has, in his past, has been known for being an outspoken a critic of Obama, as he just said. He tries to not make it personal. He challenges many of the policies. And before we went to break, Armstrong, I was talking about that there being the concern that in the Republican ranks, if it were a lunatic fringe of Confederate flag-waving fools, just a few of them, that, you know, you have that everywhere. You got some knuckleheads, you know, in every segment of our society. But some of those knuckleheads who put forth policy in legislation, like Ted Cruz, like some of the other more vitriolic conservative members of Congress, who seem from the beginning, we know about the meeting on the night that Barack Obama was first elected. And out of that mission, it was to make him a one-term president. And all of the efforts that were put forth to accomplish that goal from what became known as the Party of No. My question is, as being a Republican and being a black Republican, seeing some of the significant policies put forth and decisions being made, like the recent Supreme Court decision that your good friend Clarence Thomas voted on, which at its core is seen as a rollback of voting rights and disenfranchisement of blacks and minorities.
And women. And women.
Listen, the Republican Party policies are not motivated by race or disenfranchising anyone. The party believes that this country is becoming more and more of a nanny state, that under President Obama, the roles of welfare and these entitlement programs have expanded. I mean, we are in a very serious deficit. The problem with them, as they talk about the issues, it seems as though these issues affect the poor and those on the lower rung of the ladder more. They don't talk about these big companies that get government contracts, who too is also on the dole of the government, and they should also be cut.
Corporate welfare.
Corporate welfare,
yeah.
Absolutely, corporate welfare. It's all the same. And so people see them as just attacking the poor, those who have even less. In terms of the Supreme Court, Justice Thomas was absolutely correct in his positioning on the Voting Rights Act. Let me just say this. Listen, one of the worst things that the government could have ever have done was make black people believe that after the government allowed human slavery and de jure segregation, the reward for all this race and the fact that blacks could not achieve and acquire wealth and the kind of education that many people that regularly give them affirmative action. Everybody in this country has benefited from affirmative action except black people, white women, and now everybody else wants it. The bottom line, affirmative action is the worst thing, and they realize that. They realize that in giving them affirmative action, they could have a better form of slavery, a better form of servitude, and a better form of control. How in the world are you going to tell some mother that in order for you to get a check from the government, you got to put the husband and put the father out the household? You got to choose between the check and choose between the man in the house. It's ridiculous. Welfare has crippled the black community overall. It's okay to take a handout temporarily for somebody to help you, but you don't want it to become permanently. And the other thing it has done is destroyed the two-parent household. If you look at America, if you look at the societies and the people that thrive, these people thrive that keep their families intact. They do not allow the government to come in and tell them how to run their families, how to educate their families, and how to govern their households. We concede too much to the government. And so, Justice Thomas, why in the world would you want southern states, including mine, South Carolina, to be held to a same statute, pre-clearance that was put in place in the 1960s, that we've got to get clearance before we do certain things with our voting in our states? I mean, the South is not the only racist place in this country. Places like Massachusetts and New York and these other places are just as racist as anybody else. Why are you punishing the South? Those laws are outdated, and the laws today should reflect where we have. To say that we should still be under pre-clearance, which should say, is saying to us that we have made no progress since the 60s. So Justice Thomas is absolutely correct.
Armstrong, I think, first of all, when you talk about public assistance, I think you're pulling a page from the past. About 40 states have what's called AFDC or TANF UF, where UF stands for unemployed fathers. So no one is asking women to put their husbands out of the home because they're unemployed. That change was made as early in some states as 1965, 66, but certainly the most recent states when they did welfare reform in 1998, the UF provision was put in there. So I would just suggest in terms of welfare reform, TANF, that you update your talking points. Now, regarding the whole Voting Rights Act, Justice Thomas was absolutely wrong, and it suggests to me that as opposed to living wherever he was, Georgia, that he has been in Washington too long. I was in Shelby County, Alabama, in February of this year. The facts of the case are these. There's one black man on the county commission, one. They gerrymandered him out of his seat. That's why you have the pre-clearance. Something can look race neutral, but has racist outcomes. So I don't know, Armstrong, the reason why you have the pre-clearance is because these are states that have historically discriminated. Now, you're absolutely right about Ohio and other places where people stood in line where some of these things, so there's no place that's less racist, but I would say the South is more racist. And when you look at that history, how can you sit here and say that things have changed so much that you don't need preclearance? Understanding this, Armstrong, in 2006, the Congress, not the Democrats, but the entire Congress voted to extend the Voting Rights Act for 25 more years.
And before you answer that, Armstrong, I want to personalize this for a moment. I did a diatribe. I mean, man, when Justice, not Alito, what's the other? Justice
Scalia?
Justice Scalia said that the Section 5 was tantamount to a racial entitlement, and that, he clearly gave the indication that he was going to strike it down. On November the 6th, when the Barack Obama was voted to be president once again, I was in Las Vegas, which is where I was there to vote. So I voted, and 2 days later, on Thursday, November the 8th, I left to drive across country. And I drove from Nevada into Arizona, into New Mexico, into parts of Texas, Oklahoma, into Tennessee, and Arkansas, Tennessee, to Virginia, and home here to the district, to the D.C. area. And each time that I stopped, I was very casually dressed, looked a little bit like a bum, looked like one of the good old boys that I might have had a Confederate flag on my car. And I would go up to the gas station, or I would go into the counter in the store where I stopped to grab something to eat or to fill up. And I would say, in a bit of a southern drawl, "Can you believe that goddamn Obama got back into office once again?" Now, I did that, if my memory serves me correctly, I did that at 11 different stops. In 8 or 9 of those stops, it provoked a response that had the word nigger in it. Now, here's my point to Justice Scalia about this racial entitlement, and here's my point to why Justice Thomas, as Julianne said, is absolutely wrong. Is because those 8 people, it might have been 9, but those 8 people coming through the South there, or if I were coming through Maine and New Hampshire and they were saying that, their people, not all of them were pickup truck, boot-wearing, tobacco-spitting folks. It was some rather sophisticated-looking people that I talked to, obviously with a degree of education to be able to articulate. They said that nigger word real well. Now, those people could be on the voting boards. Those people could be the ones that sit there and determine whether or not you're going to create policies that prevent folks from voting. And you know what? If any of them were there, it wouldn't be a stretch at all to think that they would promulgate those kind of policies. And that's the historical, and there is historical evidence of that being done for decades. And if this vote had taken place in October of 2012, Barack Obama would not have been the president would have not been elected, because as soon as the vote took place, they put all those policies in place immediately to start to try to disenfranchise multitudes of people. How can that be right?
You know, I find your experience and your setting them up to be actually fascinating, because there are people like them that will always exist in these United States that would never want someone like President Barack Obama in the White House. But the irony of all this is that there are those who actually look like the people that you actually set up, voted for President Obama overwhelmingly, and voted for him again, and it's the reason why he's president of the United States. And so any scenario in a country, you're going to always have your people who live in the past. They're going to have their hatred-filled ignorance of racism and bigotry. But the bottom line is that the majority of Americans have put that past behind them and are trying to move forward to deal with real issues that are really affecting people in this country. That's not going to change. You can't legislate the heart. You can talk to people until they're blue in the face. But the bottom line is that most people in this country 15 years ago, not so long ago, when President Obama, as a candidate, was running against Mrs. Clinton, never thought he had a chance. They never thought America could get to the point where they could get rid of their own prejudices and bigotry. And so instead of just focusing on the bigotry and the racism and the hatreds that still exist, we should celebrate also the progress that he is president, and it's progress for all Americans.
But you know what made that a little more difficult to do? What made that a little more difficult to do is when he became president, those factions, I mean, we started to, you know, there was much to celebrate about that.
He was reelected.
That's right.
He was reelected. No matter what those factions may have said, what they may have thought, their power is dwindling.
Yeah.
They're losing their power. Real Americans who are put behind the bigotry are stepping forward and say, look, stand down. There's no place for this any longer. And that's what we should celebrate, the progress.
Yeah. Armstrong, certainly anybody would be a fool to argue that there has been no progress.
Tremendous progress.
However, there is a significant amount, the racial divide still exists, especially economically. You look at the unemployment rate, blacks have twice the unemployment rate as whites. I could go down the list with wealth and a number of other things. So
and you're basing that on what?
I'm basing it on race bias.
No.
Well,
that is behavior. Choices.
High unemployment is not behavioral.
You cannot. Listen, I don't know if you know this stat or not. In America, we did a study of the wealth in the United States. The average wealth of a white person in this country is $128,000 a year. The average wealth of an Asian is $126,000 a year. The average wealth of a Hispanic is $4,800 a year. The average wealth for a black is $1,700 a year. But let me tell you why. Because 90% of the young mothers, oh yeah, I know you can shake your head, but you can look it up. We've done the fact. Look it up. Challenge me. That's what I asked you to do. I'm speaking truth to facts. The bottom line, why? Because 90% of these single mothers without fathers in the household and 70% of them who have babies out of wedlock, their net worth is $100.
But Armstrong,
choices.
Let me give you another statistic. Let me give you another statistic. If you look at families age 41 to 61, African American, Asian, etc., you look at families in this recession. These 41 to 61-year-olds are college educated. So we're controlling. We're controlling, so everything else is right. When you look at white families, they have regained 99% of what they lost during the recession. If you look at Latino families, they've regained roughly 45% of what they lost in the recession. You look at black families, they've regained about 57% of what they lost in the recession. But the point is that whites have done better in recovery than African Americans and Latinos have.
And you think it's because they're white?
I do.
No. I don't think it's just because they're white. Yes, there may still be white privilege that exists in this country, but let me tell you, the choices that we make in our lives makes more of a difference. It has more of an impact on your outcome than anything else. Whether it's racism, whether somebody's challenged with cancer, whether somebody's filed bankrupt, we always have problems and challenges in life. You cannot focus on the problems where it becomes everything in your life. You got to continue to get an education. You got to get choices in the classroom by learning. You got to respect education. You cannot have these babies out of wedlock, and you cannot drop out of high school and end up in the penal system. There is more that the black community should do to hold their community accountable. Listen, I don't understand this. We should be just as outraged. Let me say this. If this had been Zimmerman, let's forget about this. Had it been black on black, nobody would have cared.
And that has nothing to do with the Trayvon Martin
Let me just finish. Had it been white on white, nobody would care. Why did we get so up in arms when some Hispanic killed some black and blacks kill each other 20, 30, 40, 50 times more? Why? Why do we have this different standard? Why are we hypocrites about it?
That is an extraordinarily
But is it a fact?
Is it a fact? Just let me finish. It is a very weak talking point to bring in black-on-black crime. Black-on-black crime is well acknowledged. It's well.
You call it weak? It's a reality.
I'm saying
look at Chicago.
It's well acknowledged. But the black-on-black crime is a totally separate issue than all of the dynamics surrounding the Trayvon Martin case, being killed by this man that got this
wrong.
man killed.
That is an injustice, but it's an injustice when you. We should value
I agree,
all lives.
but one has absolutely nothing to do with the other.
A life is a life.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is when this is brought up, and this is a favorite talking point of Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh and all the rest. All of a sudden, they become concerned and talk about black-on-black crime.
I'm concerned about all the loss of lives.
So there is no concern. There is no concern.
Oh, it's a talking point.
It's a talking point.
But it's not a talking point for me.
I understand.
I actually care.
And personal. And let me say this, to your point. You're absolutely right. And you say it to some extent like the gentleman that is thought of as a boogeyman to many in the conservative movement. No one talks about personal responsibility more, for example, the Nation of Islam leader, Louis Farrakhan, talks about personal responsibility. So we acknowledge that. And it's not like anyone in the black community is immune to that. Let's take that. Let's take that for granted. However, now we deal with policies, laws, and the rest that contribute to the state that black America is in. We'll be back in just a moment on the Rock Newman Show.
I'm fine.
Everybody, I'm Rock Newman. Fine advertisers, the DMV's greatest corporate citizen. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about the Pohanka Automotive Group. If you have any automotive needs whatsoever, if you want to sell your car, buy a car, trade in your car, have your car serviced, whatever you need, see my good friends at the Pohanka Automotive Group. You will be well taken care of, I promise. I'm Rock Newman. I might be there. Come on down and see our good friends at Pohanka Automotive Group. Hello, everybody. I'm Rock Newman from The Rock Newman Show. And I am absolutely flattered to have as one of my fine advertisers the DMV's greatest corporate citizen. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about the Pohanka Automotive Group. If you have any automotive needs whatsoever, if you want to sell your car, buy a car, trade in your car, have your car serviced, whatever you need, see my good friends at the Pohanka Automotive Group. You will be well taken care of, I promise. I'm Rock Newman. I might be there. Come on down and see our good friends at Pohanka Automotive Group.
And they are talking points.
And we are back on the Rock Newman Show today, July the 20th, 2013. I am being more than ably co-hosted by my dear friend, Dr. Julianne Malveaux, and my dear friend, Armstrong Williams, is in the studio and has caused quite a stir. It's all good. In the next hour, there will be some more provocative discussion with former Washington, D.C. mayoral candidate Leo Alexander. So stay tuned. Tell all your friends to tune in to rocknewmanshow.com and listen to us tonight at 1480 a.m. on We Act Radio from 6 to 9 p.m. Julianne Armstrong and I sparred in that last session there, and kind of you sat here. You didn't necessarily referee, but I know you had some points you wanted to make also, so I want to go to you.
Oh, thank you so much. Armstrong, you earlier said that we couldn't legislate decency, morality, or anti-racism, but here's what Dr. King said about that. He said, the law may not make you love me, but it will keep you from lynching me. And that's really where we are in terms of these stand-your-ground laws and any number of other things. These laws allow legal lynching, legal massacres. You may say to me that the jury has spoken, and the jury has spoken out of a crooked tongue. But people can disagree. I know the president would disagree if talking to me. Eric Holder, a dear friend, would disagree with me. But I'm putting myself in the position of a young black man of whom I have too many in my life to allow this kind of thing to go down without saying something. So I want you to, first of all, address the Dr. King comment, but also you talked about your home state of South Carolina. And your home state is one of the first who wanted to do the voter suppression, one of the first who wanted to talk about ID and all that. Now, there are many states, including states in the north. Of course, Pennsylvania has a piece of legislation. But all these folks have talked about attempting to restrict the ability to vote. In North Carolina, students who have moved to the state for school will be fined if they vote in that state. So how can you, I want you to address, A, again, Dr. King, but B, this whole issue of voter suppression and the implicit racism in this voter suppression. And, you know, wondering, as who has been you're a passionate advocate for personal responsibility, which nobody disagrees with. No one's walking around saying personal irresponsibility. So you're advocate for personal responsibility. You happen to be a Republican who sometimes has a race lens. So how do you really look at this voter suppression thing and say it's okay?
Listen, let me start with the Dr. King comment. You and I actually agree. The laws are critical. It is a wonderful thing when you look at the Congressional Black Caucus, you look at Deval Patrick in Massachusetts as governor, you look at Justice Thomas on the Supreme Court. It shows you just the kind of progress that we've made and the kind of people who are in positions, because there are certain people who just have certain sensitivities about how these laws should be written and an impact that they would have.
Justice Thomas is not one of those.
Yes, he is. You don't know him. That's why you say
no,
that.
It's not about,
but I know his votes.
No.
I see his votes. I don't care if I don't ever understand what kind of deodorant he wears.
Okay.
I see his votes.
You don't understand him. I do.
Okay.
We respectfully disagree on that.
Well, Armstrong, first of all, I would say to you...
Let me finish answering the question about Dr. King.
Justice Thomas is regress, not progress. And we have to be clear about that. And whether you know him personally or not, I look at his decisions.
I'm talking, that's from his votes, his policies.
And you should look
Every one of them has been against the interests of people that look like him.
In fact, it will do more to empower black people in this country in the long run than anything you can imagine. No, you're absolutely wrong.
What will? His vote? Any of his votes?
Listen, a lot of, yes, absolutely. He really cares about black people and having real power, and they're not being disenfranchised and balkanized and put in certain districts where they only can vote with themselves,
really
which is the new kind of racism. Put all the blacks together.
My little 15-year-old godson would say, "How can I tell?"
Yeah. Well, listen, because I know him, you don't have to take my word for it. Time answer all riddles. But let me finish on Dr. King. On Dr. King, you're right. You need the laws on the books. The only point that I was making was this: as many laws on the book, and as much as you can make people accountable to these laws and responsible, you cannot legislate the heart. If somebody's going to be a racist, if somebody's going to kill someone because they don't like what they look like, they're going to do it no matter what the law is. That's why the law has to be there to punish them to the full extent of the law. That's the only point I was making. Now, the other point you were asking me about South Carolina. Listen, you have to have an ID to go to sometimes a drugstore. They ask for your ID. You have to have the ID, a driver's license for just about anything. There is in this country where people have found in our voter process that people who are dead vote, and people who vote, their name is not necessarily that person. I don't see the harm. You cannot assume just because someone is asking for an ID that they're trying to suppress someone's vote. That's not the case. They want to make sure.
Do you deny that some of these moves immediately after the vote came down, which Justice Thomas was a part of? Do you deny that some of what these legislatures did in Texas, in North Carolina, in South Carolina was not clearly motivated to disenfranchise those minority voters who won't vote for the Republican legislators and office holders?
It's called politics. Democrats and Republicans are the same. We've had this since the days of Nixon and Kennedy. Elections are corrupt. They want to make sure they get their people on the rolls and disenfranchise those that are not going to support their agenda for their candidate. They all do it.
Let me tell you this.
Okay, tell me the difference.
I'll tell you the difference. And there is a monumental difference. The monumental difference is every effort made, might be stretching a little bit to say everyone, but most of the efforts made amongst Democratic legislatures is to broaden the base of the population that votes. And the Republican efforts help restrict the base. That's a huge difference.
Let me tell you what I see the difference is. Yes, I don't blame the Democrats because they know that for the most part, these voters are going to vote for them. The Republicans, it's not even that. They make sure they raise the bar to make sure that if you're voting, you are who you say you are.
But Armstrong,
and I don't see how you can argue with that.
Less than 1% of the voters, it's a fraction of 1%. It's like 0.05 of 1%. If you go back after the fact, turn out to be fraudulent votes. But the flip side of it is as many as 10% may have been disenfranchised. One of the examples of disenfranchisement is, okay, I live down the street, 13th and U. Okay, I moved to Southeast. I haven't had a chance to change my driver's license. That, if you're looking at it narrowly, would prevent me from voting. If I came back over this way and said, well, I'm going to vote in my old precinct, they could say no. If I go to vote in my new precinct, they could say no. When these things are broadly interpreted, no one's going to take my driver's license and go use it again. So essentially, that's the kind of thing that happens. Also, Armstrong, one of the things that I find very frustrating is narrowing the days at which you can vote, getting rid of early voting, getting rid of Sunday voting. You know, in some countries, they let you vote all week. In some countries, you have voting over the weekend. If I work from 9 to 5 and the polls are open from 8 to 8 or 8 to 6 and you restrict the hours, it makes it less likely for me to vote. So why not have Sunday voting? Because black folks bring their folks from church. You know, so I just respond to some of those kinds of things.
Again, you and I agree. If the process is for 2 weeks, I think every American, that right is so critical and so much is at stake, everyone should have the opportunity to vote, whether it's a 2 or 3 day process or whether it's a 2-week process. The bottom line, whether you're voting early, whatever it takes, every American, I advocate that everyone should participate in this voting process. Unfortunately, for many of those that have the opportunity to vote, the majority of us just don't vote.
That's across all states.
I'm not talking about I'm talking about everybody.
Actually, African American voter participation in this last election was higher. All people's voter participation, 57% of African Americans voted. Of course, we would hope it would be 100%, but whites voted at a lesser number than we did.
Okay, let's come back because you are a friend, you're an advocate, and you're a defender of Judge Thomas. But it's as relevant as we talk about all things Trayvon. We live in what is supposed to be a democratic society, and it's always a little uncomfortable for me to say that because as we sit here as residents of Washington, those people who are residents of Washington, D.C., we're disenfranchised, and the democracy that our people fight for around the world, we aren't able to share here in Washington, D.C. This is unapologetically a Washington, D.C. program, so it's a little uncomfortable for me to say that. But in a democratic society, the majority should count, the majority wins. That's just in its most simple form how it works. If one were to take a poll, and I don't know if anyone ever did this, but I would surmise that there would be somewhere in the neighborhood of the percentage of African Americans that voted for Barack Obama, which is in the 90% percentile of all voters. African American voted for Obama. Those 90% of African Americans, if the question were put before them to say, does Judge Thomas vote on the Supreme Court in a way that protects your interest or the interest of those that oppress you, 90% would vote that he votes in a way to protect those that are on the oppressor side. Now, you're a friend, and you would be way in the minority. But what do you say to those? Are we to be more intelligent, smarter, have a better sense of this man? Because again, I'm not talking about personal stuff. I won't get into the Anita Hill issue, which I think he was an abject liar about. I won't go there. I'll just talk about his votes on the Supreme Court. Julianne.
And let me add to that. I remember the case, it was early in his career, where some prisoners brought a case against the prison guards for beating them. And a man whose dental plate was broken in his mouth, Mr. Thomas said that was not cruel and unusual punishment. In a case with Leach Maria Sales in Boston, the union people were leafleting the cars because there have been some restrictions with NLRB from their organizing in the workplace. So out on the parking lot, they were leafleting the cars. He said that was illegal. When you look at the progress of people, not just African American people, but those the least and the left out, the disenfranchised, it seems to me that Justice Thomas has always gone against that. Now, affirmative action, he said, and affirmative action is one we'll never agree on. But in the affirmative action cases, he said that it will cause black people stigma. Affirmative action, it will cause me stigma to be unemployed. I mean, that would be my stigma. But in any case, look at that cruel and unusual punishment case, the leafleting case, and so many other cases where, in my opinion, the justice has taken a step backward as opposed to a step forward.
Do you remember his case in Boston that dealt with the Ku Klux Klan and what he wrote? Do you remember that case?
I don't.
Yeah, well, when they talked about the Ku Klux Klan wanting to get a permit to march, and they got to the Supreme Court, and he said under no conditions what they represent is horrible and there should be no place for it in this United States, and he carried the majority of the day. But, yeah.
And the dental plate?
Let me, listen, I don't want to get bogged down in getting into what I want to say though, because I feel so much at home here. Thank you so much for making me feel so much at home. I certainly appreciate it. Thank you.
People have kept their food on their plates. No one has thrown any pie at you, so I think you should feel at home.
I'm so at home, actually, but I am. But I want to say this. There's another aspect that we don't often consider here when we talk about affirmative action and all these other issues. There are so many families, especially black families, who work so hard, who make the sacrifices, pay for their kids to go to school, tutor them, make sure they take the advanced courses in high school, that when they get to college, some of them score 1450 and 1500 on the SAT. And they don't get into medical school or law school because of affirmative action or because they're race. They get into these schools because they earned it. They work hard. They're sacrificed from the day they were born, and their parents made a difference. Why should those kids be marginalized for somebody to believe that the only reason they achieve what they achieve is based on some affirmative action? Not everybody in America needs affirmative action. I'll tell you something else. Affirmative action is a bourgeois boondoggle. It benefits the upper class. No young person in this country benefits from affirmative action, let alone know what it is. Affirmative action is not helping everyday Americans. I mean, listen, as far as I'm concerned, affirmative action is dead. Listen, it doesn't work for your generation. You've got an entitlement class who thinks because they've got their PhDs, they've got their degrees, they should get more because of the sacrifices in the government over there. But what about the young people? What is it doing for them?
Well, let me give you an example I'd like to have your comment on.
Thomas benefited from affirmative action.
Yes, he did, and he said so, too. But now, let me give you an example. Let's look at the University of Michigan case. Gratz versus University of Michigan. In the University of Michigan case, a young white woman argued that she was discriminated against because she didn't get into the University of Michigan. But the University of Michigan gives you extra points if you're taking AP, Advanced Placement classes, or IB, International Baccalaureate classes. There is not one school in Detroit that offers either IP or International Baccalaureate. So if there's not one school in Detroit, majority black, that offers these things, when an African-American youngster applies, they're already at a 4-point disadvantage. So now if you give them a point or two because they're African-American, I don't see what's wrong with that. Do you?
No one should get a point based on their race. They should get it for demographic. They should get it for socioeconomic background. They should get it for achievement. Because if you consider all those factors, they will end up benefiting anyhow. But for race, there's no place for it. No place.
Well, what about the fact that in Detroit, again, I'd like you to address that. In Detroit, public schools. There is not one public school, Detroit being 1 hour's drive from University of Michigan, the school that taxpayers of Detroit subsidize, but not one IB, AP class. How do they begin to compete if already somebody in Saginaw has a 4-point advantage?
Because they have the same opportunity to have that same 4.0 advantage.
No, they don't. How do they have the same opportunity when their schools don't have those classes?
Stop the video games. Stop watching sports and start studying.
Well, even if you study, Armstrong,
Let's push academics and education for a change.
I don't disagree with you, but I'm saying...
Let's do that. Let's stop making excuses for them.
But I'm saying that these schools do not have that opportunity. Should their parents move out of Detroit?
Affirmative action doesn't go nearly far enough. We need, because until affirmative action reaches back in a very substantive way and starts to talk about what would be the fairness doctrine of, and then the term I just lost, reparation, until the fairness doctrine of reparations.
You would take it if they gave it to you?
You damn right I would. And we
could not
this
give it to
country
me.
was built on the back.
It to me. I don't want it.
This country
well,
was.
We'll take yours too. Then
You can have it.
The White House and the Capitol was built on the back of black.
Yours.
Oh, we'd sure take it, and it would be a very fair,
I don't trust anything the government is giving. Okay?
And wise thing to do.
No.
It'll also be reasonable and wise to get you back in here at some point. Right now, we've got to take a break and go, and we'll come back in the 11 o'clock hour and resume this conversation of all things Trayvon on The Rock Newman Show.
From Pohanka Nissan and Pohanka Hyundai. It's hard to be down on your luck when you're Virginia's first choice for new Nissan and Hyundais, but I need to sell 60 cars this week. Right now, I'll pay you big bucks for your good luck. Bring down any good luck charm you've got, and based on the sale price of the car you choose, I'll give you up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car this week. Today, your lucky penny is worth plenty, up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car you want. Stop moping and hoping you'll get approved. With my For the People credit approval process, the banks are looking to get lucky and lend to you, even if you've been turned down before. Bring me any good luck charm and I'll give you up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car today. Hurry, once I get rid of 60 cars, the luck runs out. All offers require bank approval, so call us at 1-800-POHANKA, visit Pohanka Nissan and Pohanka Hyundai on Route 1 in Fredericksburg, or better yet, log on to timpohankaforthepeople.com. And when we make a deal, I promise it'll be your lucky day.
We are a tribe. This is a place where racial and cultural connections are consciously uplifted, a place where art, culture, and politics intentionally collide. This is a space to take a deliberate pause and feed your mind, body, and soul. We believe by creating such a space, we can actually change our community, change D.C., and change the world for the better. And now, The Rock Newman Show.
Welcome back to the last segment of today's Rock Newman Show, Saturday, July the 20th, 2013. I am Rock Newman. I have been just absolutely flattered and honored to have had my co-host here this hour, Dr. Julianne Malveaux. We're talking all things Trayvon Martin, and we dubbed actually today The Rock and the Doc Show. In studio at the table with us here is Mr. Leo Alexander. Leo is a former TV personality in Mobile, Alabama, New Orleans, and more recently in Washington, D.C. at NBC News. And he is a mayoral candidate. Leo Alexander, former mayoral candidate. And you know, as I watched the 2010 mayoral race, Leo Alexander was in it and didn't have quite the name recognition as some of the others who were in that race. But repeatedly, I would see him show up at forums, coming with some very, what I thought were solid ideas for the citizens of Washington, D.C. I've been very impressed with many of the positions that you've taken. And we're Facebook friends.
That's right.
And
most importantly.
and I watch, I see his posts on Facebook. They are very, very popular. They are thought-provoking, very, very thought-provoking, oftentimes controversial. And so Leo, after the mayor's race, has stayed very engaged in the community, very engaged with politics and social issues. So welcome to the Rock Newman Show.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here also with Doctor here.
And obviously the Trayvon Martin case has aroused your passions in multiple ways. In terms of your having and suggesting that there be introspection, that there be real introspection by all elements of the community, white, black, and otherwise.
Absolutely.
Part of what you've talked about was what you thought was the inherent racism that was attached to this case and elements of race. Mm-hmm. And you also have been a strong proponent of pretty much a blanket boycott of all things Florida.
Yes.
We want to talk about all of that today.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you again for inviting me here to speak with both of you and your audience out worldwide. I want to tell you that my brother over in Copenhagen, Denmark, and his family are watching right now, and they happen to be listening to your last guest, and he called me while I was sitting out here in your audience and said, how many black folks are like that? I said, quite a few, unfortunately.
Well, actually, the correct answer would be not many.
All right.
Thank God.
Okay. But yeah, because of this, first of all, I want to give a shout out to our president for the comments that he said yesterday. He spoke to the pain, the visceral pain, and the history behind it, because we all expected justice. But when the verdict happened, it was like a scab had just been ripped off a wound that never was healed. Yeah. And that's why you saw the response from our community of anger and feeling of betrayal, of not feeling like the American dream will ever attain to us. Yeah. So I started thinking then. I started the conversations with my Facebook friends, and we went back and forth, and my first call was to not be violent. Let's not burn down our neighborhoods. Let's think about what we do next. Now that we have the president coming out, laying out how it feels to be an African American.
Leo, please pardon me.
Sure.
Let me just stop right there. Stop you there.
Okay.
And touch on something. The need for you to make that suggestion and recommendation of let's not be violent, let's not burn down our neighborhoods. You know, I find it somewhat insidious in newspaper reports and advisories and, you know, all of the networks talking about the potential for rioting.
Right.
based on that.
And even more than that, I mean, part of the challenge here is that we've come a long way since the OJ case.
Yeah. And since 68.
Exactly. When we did not own our neighborhoods. It's more likely for us to own our neighborhoods now, not to justify any of the uprisings that occurred, and I use the word uprisings, not riots, the uprisings that occurred during that time period, but to basically look at the fact that things have changed. We embrace that change. It is racist and it is narrow to suggest that people of African descent don't know how to do anything but take it to the streets. Right. And I know some of the suggestions you've made show that we can do more than take it to the streets.
Absolutely.
And so we have to be clear about adopting the language of the oppressor. Yeah. And that's when people start talking about we have more extra police on because these people are going to riot. We're not animals. I mean, how dare they? Right. What would they have done if Zimmerman were found guilty? Would they have rioted?
Right. And it was and that was never said.
Exactly.
And therein is a big difference. And it's a big difference that I hope that from what we do at this table and this microphone, it shows that difference and hopefully sensitizes people to those differences and those perceptions. I'm sorry, Leo.
No, that's quite all right. But we have to also be conscious of the fact that these uprisings, this action by people who feel powerless in a sense, have happened in our history. Sure. I mean, the Rodney King verdict, for instance, it has happened. So
but that was 20 years ago, Leo.
No, I understand that. But the situations within our community haven't improved that much over 20 years. You still have a large segment of our community who are disenfranchised and feel powerless in a sense. And when you have these uprisings, that's their voice. That's what they're speaking. That's an action by them. So what I was saying on Facebook was, okay, now that we have the president coming out and articulating the pain and what the history behind the pain, now we also have Eric Holder, our Attorney General, saying that we're not going to release the gun back to Mr. Zimmerman because we want to hold that as evidence in a potential case by the U.S. Justice Department. Okay, that's great. Now what are we going to do as a community, black people? So what I'm speaking of is not only to our community, but also white people, because I've got a lot of white folks who are my Facebook friends who've also chimed in as to their outrage on the verdict as well. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, this is what we do. We've got to hit them in a way that they will feel it. Marches, speeches don't work. I was born in Brooklyn, but I was raised in Mobile, Alabama, the Deep South. And one thing I learned was, racism is expensive. And they learned that in Montgomery, Alabama during the bus boycott. The white city fathers realized after a year they couldn't afford to be racist any longer. They had to allow the blacks to sit wherever they wanted to sit. Mm-hmm. So they ended the boycott.
Couldn't afford to practice.
They couldn't. Exactly.
Well, they couldn't afford to keep the bus system afloat.
Exactly. Right. So we pulled back the money. Mm-hmm. So what are we going to do to Florida? I did a little research before coming on your show, and I realized that tourism is a huge industry for the state of Florida. Orange juice is a multi-billion-dollar industry in the state of Florida. So we're going to hit them at both places. We're going to cancel our conventions, we're going to cancel our vacations, and we're not going to South Beach. There's several other beaches around the country to go to. We're going to do that immediately. That's what I'm calling for, at least, and I'd love for everyone else to jump on board. You got Stevie Wonder already saying he won't perform down there, so that's wonderful.
You know if that product, the Simply Orange, is that a Florida product?
No, I don't know that.
That's Simply Orange and mango. Man, that's some serious.
Yeah, but you're going to have to give it up, Rhett. You're going to have to give it up.
And that limeade.
Yeah. But you're going to have to give it up.
But just a minute, Leo.
Okay, we love Trayvon. We'll give it up.
Okay.
Let me ask you a question, though. I mean, any kind of economic action we can take is good, as well as any kind of marching and protest. But Florida has a certain percentage of African-American people who live there. Have you thought through what those boycotts mean to those black people who live there? Because we don't want to punish an African-American person who lives in Florida.
You're absolutely right. But here's the deal. In every protest, there must be personal sacrifice. During the Montgomery bus boycott, people had to chip in together and create carpools. People had to walk. People had to sacrifice. You cannot have a protest and expect things to change if everybody wants to be comfortable.
Yeah.
I'm not dealing with discomfort, but let me say that I'm a Floridian.
Won't be affected. Of course they will be affected.
Well, let's say I'm a Floridian. who picks oranges, which puts you at the bottom of the income distribution. You do not make a lot of money picking oranges. So I'm a Floridian who picks oranges. This boycott is successful. Now I'm a Floridian who is jobless. Unless people are prepared, and I haven't weighed in on this either way. I'm just thinking through, as an economist, what this means to individuals and individual families. So you're the Floridian who picks oranges.
$10 billion industry. Go ahead.
So that $10 billion industry includes African American employees.
I'm sure.
And from your perspective, what does that mean?
Some of them will have to find other jobs. Some of them will have to either get on the safety net that the state provides.
And I would also say in support of what you're saying, if in fact there was that kind of mass action,
yes,
that would be a temporary situation.
Yes.
And then the orange growers in Florida would have a greater degree of respect for the community.
Absolutely.
And perhaps those people can come back under better conditions and maybe with higher wages.
That's exactly what
that's
I
a
hope.
potential.
There you go.
That's a potential, again.
Yeah.
No, I understand that.
And I would like to hear from our Florida brothers and sisters, a Florida branch of the NAACP, and folks like that before any action like this were taken, just so folks can talk about, we support this, we don't support this. One of the things we know about the anti-apartheid boycotts and the movement to have companies doing business in South Africa withdraw.
To divest, yeah.
Is that the South Africans said themselves, we want this system to be ungovernable. And when you start pulling money out, it was ungovernable. The African National Congress said, we don't care if we're hurt because this is a greater good.
It's a bigger picture.
That's right.
But again, that's a question we have to ask Black Floridians.
They bought into the sacrifice that I was talking about.
Yeah.
So in the other industry that I wanted to hit was tourism. It's a $70 billion industry. It's the second largest industry in the U.S. as far as tourism of all the states in the country. California is number one. But the point is, Disney, we have to stop going there. And then I looked on a couple of our brothers' websites that I'll mention. Reverend Al has a convention coming up in Miami next month, and Brother Tom Joyner has a convention coming up in around Labor Day in Orlando. These conventions must be canceled because they have to understand we are very serious. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on, as far as boycott is concerned, being a child of the South, I understand how important college football is in that community.
Yeah.
So if we remove our money...
That cannot be overstated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you remove your money, first of all, and you've got President Obama and Eric Holder taking care of the political and criminal side of it, then we have to also remove our talent. And what I mean by that is you cannot, if you have a child that's in high school being recruited by a school in Florida, you cannot let him sign with that school. Let him sign with any other school in the SEC, ACC, or any other conference except Florida schools. They cannot win without black talent, and you know this, Rock. So the point is that if we cut off the talent, we cut off the economic support of the system will implode on its own. And then they will see that racism is too expensive. They cannot do it any longer.
And the ultimate effect of these suggestions, is it to change the stand your ground law? What are you looking for the impact to be?
Not only, we're going to make an example out of the state of Florida. We're going to change the law there. But there are roughly 24 other states that also have the same law. So what we're going to do is use the Florida blueprint, all right? Make an example and say, you're next. Whether it's Alabama, Kentucky, or wherever we're talking about, you're next. And they will voluntarily come to the table and say, okay, we're going to change this.
Leo, when you say we, who are you talking about?
I'm talking about not only...
What are you talking about?
No. Unfortunately, I'm not. I'm just talking about black people, period. We have a voice. We don't need to wait on brothers in the NAACP or brothers in the National Action Network or Rainbow Coalition. We can do this ourselves. If the Arab brothers started their Arab Spring on Facebook, why can't we start our boycott on Facebook?
Yeah.
Well,
and, I mean, you're talking about something that I think, frankly, is noble and a lofty goal. It is also about mass mobilization.
That's right.
And mass mobilization is, if you go back to Marcus Garvey, we got to talk about some very, very serious fundamental infrastructure and organizing. But you know what? In 2013, I would suggest that we should be able to accomplish that again, with Facebook and
That's
Twitter
right.
and
Quickly.
cell phone and on all the rest.
Quickly.
You know, I mean, the 1963 March on Washington was put together sans cell phone, sans all this social
word of mouth,
social
word
media.
of churches, and
Yeah.
all those kind
That's
of
it.
things. It is very possible to look at any number of types of actions in response to this particular case. My argument, however, would be that these things have to be very carefully thought
Vetted,
out,
yeah.
and they have to be sustainable, which is why, Rock, we talked earlier about, I won't say an idea I had, because a friend of mine, Cheryl Poinsett Brown, lifted it up to me yesterday. We were talking about Trayvon being 17 years old.
Yes, we want to talk about that in the next segment. We're going to go
Okay.
to a quick break, and we've got to come back. That's a very important element. Be back in a moment at the Rock Newman Show at Busboys and Poets in Washington, D.C.
My baby drives a pole handcuff.
The weekend is here, and no matter what the weather's like outside, you'll find the deals inside here in the beautiful showroom of the all-new Pohanka Hyundai in Capitol Heights during their giant Markdown Madness sale.
Smart shoppers know that every new Hyundai in Pohanka comes with Hyundai Assurance and America's best 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty. But why don't you tell them about the markdown sale, Joe?
I'll be happy to, Kim. Folks, shop around on the web, and you'll see lease payments on a new 2013 Elantra GLS at $179 a month. Today at Pohanka Hyundai, $99 a month. That's right, a $99 payment on a brand new Elantra.
And $89 a month on a new 2013 Accent GLS Automatic. How do they do it, Joe?
It must be the volume, Kim. A brand new building, hundreds of new Hyundais, and Pohanka's low payment and easy credit programs are designed to get everybody driving. But you have to get here today. Rush to the giant Markdown Madness sale at exit 13 off the Capitol Beltway.
Pohanka Hyundai, king of the Beltway. All financing for a limited term on approved HMF credit.
My baby drives a pole handcuff.
Julianne Malveaux in studio is Leo Alexander, former newsman with multiple stations around the country and former mayoral candidate for Washington, D.C. Leo is here and was talking about advocating how to make an economic impact through some forms of boycott and mass mobilization on Florida and other states, ultimately that would lead to other states that have what may be discriminatory laws, laws that don't value the lives of folks in the African American community having a real impact. It's a noble effort. Obviously, it's a very large undertaking. One of the things I want to go talk about before we get to your point that you were making before we left was I had a dear friend in Florida to send me an email, and it had 17 rules for black men, young black men, to survive. And it had to do not run in public, not have anything in your hand. When the police stop you, be very direct, that sort of thing. You know, I bring that up because it is a form, I would suggest, of stress.
Oh, yeah.
That African American parents have. And it is a dynamic that young African American men have to deal with out of necessity. And parents have to be concerned that they have to still today, we talk about the progress that we've made or even lack thereof. And when you feel a need, when you feel a sense of obligation, like Eric Holder talked about, that he has a son and he had to have today the conversation with his son that his father had with him some 35 or 40 years ago. That's a tough thing to deal with. That is a level of stress that I think in President Obama's speech yesterday, he was trying to communicate. You know, he had such a tough job to do, but I think he did the best that he could, because he was, again, as described by one writer, trying to explain black Americans to white Americans, and that ain't an easy job. Well, in terms of things to do, I bring out this gentleman, Donald Watkins is his name. He's originally from Alabama, as a matter of fact. His dad was president of Alabama State for a year, Dr. Watkins.
Okay.
He talked about what Dr. Watkins' rules of survival. And there would happen to be 17 of them. Of course, Trayvon Martin was 17 years old. And Julianne, you've talked just briefly, and I certainly would like for you to elaborate on that number 17 and how it applies as we talk about all things Trayvon.
Well, I don't want the momentum that we have now to be swallowed. This is not about a one-time thing. As both of you have said, we have laws on books in every state that discriminate against young black men and against African-American people in general. So I was talking to a good friend last evening, Cheryl Poinsett Brown, who lives in Atlanta. She is the mom of my godchild, who is 16. And so we're constantly concerned. He already knows, the po-po come, just put your hands up. Drop whatever you have, put your hands up, because you don't want to get shot. You want to make it clear that you don't have a weapon.
I want to say to those that are listening and to our white brothers and sisters, hear this. This woman told her godchild, her son,
my godchild,
if the po-po comes, just put your hands up. You know, I mean, think about what that means and the message that is sending, that is sending out of necessity, because the thing to do is you're in survival mode then.
Well, precisely because of I mean, what my nephews have learned from their interactions with the police are that the police are not their friend. Now, you know, you want people to think the police are your friend. They teach it in school. If something bad happens, you go find a policeman.
Yeah, they call it officer friendly.
Yeah, well, officer unfriendly in the African American community. Right. But the 1717 idea is that it was Trayvon Martin was 17 years old. So on the 17th of every month, for as long as we need to, we want people to come out in their own communities, whether it's 10 people, 17 people, 170 people, but all over the country to have the 1717 movement. Because we can't forget Trayvon Martin. I mean, what tends to happen with us is we treat race relations like a football game.
Yeah.
You know, football season, the basketball season, but so you forgot what happened during football season. And what we have to say is that there is a concerted effort on the 17th of each month for black folks, white folks, whoever has a problem with this, to come out. Now, it's just an idea at this point, but you know, maybe state capitals, but in every city, stand up in front of a Justice Department office or in front of City Hall to say, we won't put up with this. And it really has to be everywhere. We can't just focus on Florida, although boycott ideas work. But we got to focus on any place that one of our children has been shot. we also, in doing that 1717, we pay some attention as well, which is equally important, to the scourge of guns and black-on-black crime.
Yeah.
See, these people who all of a sudden care about black people, it's like the anti-abortionists who care about children until they get here.
Right.
You know, and then all of a sudden, they don't care. They don't want to have food for those kids. They want you to have the child, but they don't want to support.
Right.
So, you know, we want to say it's not just about one city, one state. It's about our nation and the racism that has riddled our nation continuously. So if we make this seasonal, everybody's mad now. If we make this seasonal, just seasonal, we forget Trayvon Martin. His parents have a foundation, and I think some of these ideas should be run through their foundation, at least so that there is some centralized. Now, Reverend Sharpton is doing something today in 100 cities or more. And again, Leo, I don't think that he went to 100 cities and said, let's do this. I think the idea was put out there, and people are doing it. So again, your idea, I think is a good idea, but as I said, I would like to get some input from Black Floridians. But meanwhile, 1717, remember those numbers.
Yeah.
My motivation is I want to take Trayvon Martin and make him this generation's Emmett Till. And that's, if we can do that effectively, we won't forget. And the reason why we're saying Florida first is because that's where the crime happened and that's where the verdict happened.
Right.
So we can target them. And I have to reiterate, because during the commercial break, I got into a conversation with some of the crew.
Yeah.
And they talked about, you're absolutely right about football. The reason why that is so important, if we remove our sons out of their football system and let them go to any other city, any other state school around the country, they will feel the impact immediately.
Oh, it would be a collapse.
Immediately.
Football is perhaps beyond religion.
Exactly.
In these places.
You have to understand. No, you really, no, and I'm serious. He's not exaggerating because it's a culture. It's a way of life. And now that they have gotten used to our black talent, they won't have receivers, they won't have running backs, they won't have linebackers, they won't have defensive backs. If we pull our kids out and say, look, Florida is hostile to African Americans. Our sons, we fear for their safety in the state of Florida. We're going to ask for an exemption from the NCAA to get them moved to other schools. Once we do that, regardless of what we do with orange juice and Disney tourism, that will have the most impact and the fastest impact.
But you know what? NCAA is not likely. I mean, we've seen these governing bodies, for example, when Serena Williams was heckled at Indian Creek, I believe, they said they would not go back there. Then the tennis governing body put Indian Creek on the list of must-play tournaments. They were, both Williams sisters were prepared to take the penalty to not play at Indian Creek. And you see they maintain their ratings. But for a young brother who is attempting to, and I don't mean to be the contrarian here, but I think about these things.
But it's good. It's healthy. It's healthy.
Absolutely.
But with a young brother's football career, 4 years, is what he's going to use as base either for NFL, which we know, of course, the likelihood of NFL, but also
not likely.
What is it, 0.16% or something like that, but also for potentially other kinds of career opportunities. To ask someone to redshirt for a year, and I know so little about football that I just have that one.
No, I understand.
But,
we're not asking.
But the other pieces you're talking about, the NCAA making an exception. Now, how likely do you think that's going to be?
That's not the position that we should take. We shouldn't take the position of, well, will they let us do it? We shouldn't take that position. The position that I'm advocating is we're going to do it. We're going to force their hand. This is about justice. And if you're an American, you stand for justice. And if a child says, I fear for my safety in this community, I want to move somewhere else, how can you not support that?
Yeah, Leo, here's what I want to ask you, if you've thought this out this far. Okay, let's just say that there is the infrastructure put in place, there's the organization put in place to really do this kind of mass mobilization. Now, it's a noble effort, but it's a huge undertaking. It is and we should never, I think, be deterred because it's a big job.
Yes.
Okay.
But it's only one state, though, Rock.
I know. I understand.
Let's keep it in mind.
And so,
one state.
And so, okay, so if these things were to be done,
yes,
and they were met with success that black families would realize we need to make the sacrifice we might not be able to work in the orange groves for a little bit, or our child might not go to Florida University. We might have to go somewhere else. And so you meet with some success there.
There are plenty of HBCUs in that state, too.
Absolutely.
Yes, there are.
Florida A&M, Bethune-Cookman,
yes.
plenty.
Yes, okay. So you do that to have and to cause Florida, the state of Florida, to do what?
To influence their legislators that racism is too expensive. And it won't be just us advocating for these changes. It will be the lobbyist for the tourism industry, it will be the lobbyist for the juice industry, and it will be the lobbyist for all of the universities. They will go to Tallahassee on our behalf because they understand the impact of what we're doing. They will go there and say, look, you are costing us money. We cannot afford this. That's how you get change. Because marches and speeches, I don't think they really feel that anymore.
Well, I think that marches and speeches are important when they're coordinated. And I don't think that, I mean, from an activist perspective, you want to do two things. One, you want to hit them where it hurts. Right. That's the money piece. Right. But the other thing is you want to keep the eye on a Trayvon type case, which is that's the 1717 idea. I think it's got to be a combination of things. But I have a question for you. You said that Tom Joyner was having a cruise, a meeting. And who else was having a meeting?
Reverend Al is having his National Action Network convention in Miami.
Okay, so are you prepared to ask these brothers to withdraw their conventions?
Yes, I am. We all have to ask them to do it. It's not just me. I've got sons, and that's why I'm angry about this and have put together this plan. But everyone should be asking Reverend Al and Brother Tom Joyner to move your convention to another state. I mean, look, if they honestly feel the same pain and have the same visceral reaction that we in the 90% of the black community has because of the verdict, we're not asking for too much.
Right.
That's the bottom line.
Let me ask you, Leo, growing up in Mobile, Alabama.
Yes.
Did you have the kind of tutelage or the kind of suggestion from your parents, grandparents, whoever, you were reared by, that Donald Watkins had in terms of a survival mode, one, and two, you have black boys today. Do you feel a need to share those kinds of survival skills with them today?
Yes, and to answer you, it's a two-part question. Yes. My background. My mother, she was a revolutionary back in the 60s before I even knew what the term was. She moved her family of three sons, I'm the youngest of three sons, to Copenhagen, Denmark during the height of the Vietnam movement because she didn't want to sacrifice her sons to the war.
Really?
Yes. So that's the household I grew up in.
Wow.
You understand?
Wow.
So when we got to Alabama in '72, that's her hometown.
Yeah.
I was prepared for her hometown. But we approached it as, she made sure that we were educated, we read all the time, and she gave us the historical background of what it means to be a black male in the South. And luckily I had other uncles, the supporting exterior family, to chip in as well. Right. So when you talk now, the other question how about my sons? I've got a son at that university that you mentioned right earlier, Alabama State University. Right. He will be graduating this year, Corey. And it's very important that we've had these conversations. And my other sons, they're not old enough, but we're going to have these conversations. And you feel this. There is a strain that's put on black people, especially black men, and I'm not going to say that sisters don't feel it because they have to rear black men as well, but the oppression that you feel knowing that there's 17 rules of survival, those are legitimate rules.
Yeah.
That's real.
Yeah.
So there is a stress and there is a pain that's put on you, and that's the reason why I would suspect that we suffer from more high blood pressure and hypertension than anybody else.
And different life expectancies. Paul Laurence Dunbar, we wear the mask that grins and lies, that hides our teeth, our cheeks rather, and shades our eyes. We wear the mask. And we, whether it's black men or black women are wearing a mask because we have to basically play the game.
Absolutely.
And you have to play the game. And the game for brothers, unfortunately, is put your hands up. The game for sisters is you know, you're Oprah. You're not Oprah as in the millions. That would work for me. But you know, you're basically everybody's problem solver. People come and bring their challenges. When they've done these schools, there's a study called the soccer studies that look at the way that children are interacted with in education, in classrooms. And what they find is that when white boys are hyper, they say, oh, they're very interested, they're active, they're interactive. When black boys are hyper, they say they're
disruptive.
Yeah, disruptive, criminal. You know, how could a third grade child be criminal? When white girls jump in, they're often tamped down. Don't jump in. Well, black girls jump in, again, it's a whole different. The only population that's encouraged to jump in is basically white boys. So, you know, this wearing of the mask and the stress of inequality that at some level you must accept or something will happen, you must accept, explains why the life expectancies are different. I mean, I don't know how many brothers who were in my age band, which I won't tell.
29?
Yeah, for the 30th time. But brothers who, you know, who live well, not poor, maybe don't smoke, maybe eat healthily, but are gone at age 50-something.
Yeah.
And you have to say that a large part of that had to do with the stress. And when you look at these brothers who are professionals, attorneys, you know, physicians, I mean,
whatever they are.
But they're living their life, but they always also have that whole notion of the stress and the racism. And, you know, we talk about black women, but we have to be very clear. I think that brothers explode and sisters implode. When you look at the level of obesity in our community, and sisters being more likely to be obese, that's about, you know, emotional feeding. I was talking to a sister friend the other day, and I said, what are you doing? She said, eating the cheesecake. I said, eating a cheesecake? I said, surely you mean a slice of cheesecake. And she said, no, she had some problems at work. She said, so I just went to the freezer and took out a cheesecake. Cheesecake, oh, do me a favor, cut it in half. No, cut it in four. She said, well, I already ate half. I said, okay, I would call that sufficient. You know, but this is, you're feeding the pain, you're feeding the pain. And so we have to be clear that our community lives in almost constant pain, because if it isn't you that it's happened to personally, you know somebody that it's happened to.
Yeah.
It's a full-time job being black. We'll be right back.
This is Leprechaun Tim Pohanka from Pohanka Nissan and Pohanka Hyundai. It's hard to be down on your luck when you're Virginia's first choice for new Nissan and Hyundais, but I need to sell 60 cars this week. Right now, I'll pay you big bucks for your good luck. Bring down any good luck charm you've got, and based on the sale price of the car you choose, I'll give you up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car this week. Today, your lucky penny is worth plenty, up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car you want. Stop moping and hoping you'll get approved with my For the people credit approval process, the banks are looking to get lucky and lend to you, even if you've been turned down before. Bring me any good luck charm and I'll give you up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car today. Hurry, once I get rid of 60 cars, the luck runs out. All offers require bank approval, so call us at 1-800-POHANKA. Visit Pohanka Nissan and Pohanka Hyundai on Route 1 in Fredericksburg, or better yet, log on to TimPohankaForThePeople.com. And when we make a deal, I promise it'll be your lucky day. I'm Tim Pohanka, and I'm a leprechaun for the people.
My baby drives a Pohanka.
The weekend is here, and no matter what the weather's like outside, you'll find the deals inside here in the beautiful showroom of the all-new Pohanka Hyundai in Capitol Heights during their giant Markdown Madness sale.
Smart shoppers know that every new Hyundai in Pohanka comes with Hyundai Assurance and America's best 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty. But why don't you tell them about the Markdown sale, Joe?
I'll be happy to, Kim. Folks, shop around on the web, and you'll see lease payments on a new 2013 Elantra GLS at $179 a month. Today at Pohanka Hyundai, $99 a month. That's right, a $99 payment on a brand new Elantra.
And $89 a month on a new 2013 Accent GLS Automatic. How do they do it, Joe?
It must be the volume, Kim. A brand new building, hundreds of new Hyundais, and Pohanka's low payment and easy credit programs are designed to get everybody driving. But you have to get here today. Rush to the giant Markdown Madness sale at exit 13 off the Capitol Beltway.
Pohanka Hyundai, king of the Beltway. All financing for a limited term on approved HMF credit.
My baby drives a Pohanka.
Yeah.
Well, that's the usual.
Welcome back, folks, to the Rock Newman Show. We broadcast live every Saturday from 9 a.m. to noon from the Langston Hughes Room at Busboys and Poets at 14th and V Street, Northwest Washington, D.C. We invite you to come down to be a part of our conversation every Saturday morning. Come down for food for the soul and also some really outstanding food for your tummy. So make plans to join us every Saturday. We're going to have interesting, stimulating, we hope enlightening discussion. Part of what we fully intend to do here with this show is to follow in the footsteps of the vision of the founder of Busboys and Poets, whose mission is to help change the world for the better, one person and one step and one day at a time. We will be searching, and I encourage all of you that are out there in live streaming land around the world, in Copenhagen, Denmark also. Got a dear friend in Antigua that's watching the show, Bermuda. And I would just get punched if I didn't talk about Patricia, who is watching in Norway.
Oh, wow.
I would encourage all of you, when you see something like I talked about earlier today, was the heroism of Tamar Boggs, who saved a little white girl who had been abducted in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And you know what? It doesn't matter if you're white, black, Hispanic, Arabic. It doesn't matter. If you see, I want to encourage you. I want to ask you that if you see something of good, let us know about it. Call us, write us, get us on Facebook, on Twitter, at therocknewmanshow.com. And let us know about that good. We're finding the good, lifting it up, and celebrating it whenever we can.
You know,
each Saturday, we want that to be a part of this show.
Betty Shabazz used to always say, find the good and praise it.
Yes.
And I think that's really important when we think about so much good. Tamar, the young brother, should be on everybody's headline. He should have been interviewed. If we spent a fraction of the time that they gave Robert Zimmerman, who should just keep his mouth shut for the rest of his life.
George.
That Robert is the family spokesperson.
Oh, yeah, yes,
Who's
yes,
been
yes,
running around, running his mouth.
Yeah.
But we gave a fraction of that time, a minute, to this young brother.
Right.
It really changed perceptions. But the other thing I wanted, years ago, I think it was CBS News interviewed Cliff Alexander and I on a piece about racism. And something I said there, one of my Facebook friends reminded me of, I said, when white people were as outraged about racism as black people were, that's when, we have no more racism. When white people are willing to put themselves on the line as much as we are, then that's when it's over. But there are a whole lot of white folks who don't want to talk about American history.
No.
Talk about the, I always say the greatest act of black economic development was self-emancipation. Yeah. Black people who purchased themselves. And whenever I say that, I get like this feeling in the pit of my stomach, but purchased themselves so that they could be free. That's an act of economic development. Yeah. And, why should you have to purchase yourself in the land of the thief and the home of the slave? I mean, why should you have to buy yourself? Yeah. What a terrible contradiction. Yeah. Though, we're off point, and I want to stay off point for a minute, because I want to ask Leo about city politics. We're talking about racial profiling. Do you think there's been profiling in the number of African-American politicians here in D.C. who have been fast-laned to jail?
Without a doubt. I'm very disappointed. First of all, I'm happy to see that our U.S. Attorney, Mr. Machen, is doing what he's doing, cleaning up City Hall. But it's hard for me to think that it's only black people who are corrupt in that building, especially when you had other council members like Mr. Graham, who has been sanctioned for his activities.
Put money in an envelope in his file cabinet, and he gets a slap on the wrist.
Exactly.
Where Kwame...
he just gets reprimanded, basically. And then you have other council members who have relationships that haven't been thoroughly explained with vendors of the city. And I think the main problem at City Hall is, if you're going to be a council member, if you're going to clean up that city, you have to remove their outside employment. You cannot have people making $250,000 working for law firms who represent clients who do business in the district, and then also have that council member work as a city council member on the council. You can't do that, because you can't serve you can't serve two masters. Because if you're being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars by your law firm, and then you're just being paid $125 by the city, who are you most loyal to?
So do you think that the council should have higher salaries?
No, I think the council should have a rule saying no outside employment. I think they're being paid more than enough right now, $125,000 for a part-time job. Are you kidding me? So we should stop it right there. If you're going to really see, public service is an opportunity for you to serve your community. It's not an opportunity for you to get rich. And that's the problem. The mentality I've seen in a lot of our public servants here in Washington, D.C. is they get in these jobs. They're making $100,000 and some a year, but they're sitting around the table negotiating $1 million contracts with vendors all day. And they think that they are entitled to living that same lifestyle as that vendor across the table. That's the problem. They for some reason, they lose sight of what public service is truly all about. It's about sacrifice.
Reflect on your own experience as a mayoral candidate. You ran, you did not have the endorsements or the support or the dollars that many of the other people had. You actually, I saw you at a couple of debates, you managed yourself very credibly, which is, you could stomp with the big boys in terms of debate, quality, what you had to say, but you didn't have the dollars to really make that much of an impact, except for have some conversation.
Right.
So what's your reflection on that, especially in light of what's happening with the whole shadow campaign and campaign finance in D.C.?
I think the bottom line is we have to remove money out of public politics. And the only way to do that is, I want to clarify, I did get endorsed by the taxi cab union. I must speak up for my cabbies. They were behind me 100%.
Okay.
But the problem is that they don't have the money, or didn't have the money, that the developers have, or the big unions like the teachers union, police department, fire, the big unions. And when you go into public service, you have to compromise yourself when you meet with all these people, because they all want something for their money and their support. And so what I decided was, if I ever throw my hat in the ring again, I'm going to have to spend my own money, so I don't have to compromise. But then I'm also going to have to call on the city to use our district cable TV station to cover all the debates. Because the problem is when you only have one newspaper like the Washington Post covering the debates, they can dictate the election by only singling it out two opponents. Yeah. And that's what they did. There were 10 other people running for mayor, but they only focused on two, the ones with the money.
I'd like to take this narrow issue, as you said, off point, bring it back on point, and broaden it.
Sure.
Meaning, we're talking about all things Trayvon.
Uh-huh.
And you just talked about money in politics and needing to get money out of politics. It seems to me to be a very fundamental point that in order to create fairness, you have to do less, if you will. And what I mean by that is figuring out a way to so drastically limit what candidates and politicians from dog catcher to president have to raise. And, right. And that way you cut down on the influence of all of these special interests.
Right.
Because the stated goal and role of a politician is to represent the citizens.
That's right.
And much too often, it's taken for granted now that the politicians are simply represent special interests that pay for their elections.
That's exactly.
So what can we as a people do to remove money from political campaigns?
I would like to see, and one thing that happened here in Washington, D.C. Several years ago, the community voted for term limits. But as soon as we voted for term limits, the council turned right around under the leadership of Jack Evans and turned that vote themselves and said, no, we're not going to do it. And they've done it again on this issue of, recently they had an issue where they shot down the vote of the people. So my problem is, how do we remove money from politics? I would like to see just set it at $50,000 and just said you can't raise over $50,000. And then from that $50,000,
you're talking now back to city politics?
That's right. Mm-hmm. That's right. But of course, national politics, you've got public financing. There should be certain things that you can qualify for. If you can yourself raise $50,000, then the public should kick in some matching dollars so you can compete. That's what I would like to see on a national level.
You know, Leo, you had me until you said if you can raise $50,000.
Yeah. No, I understand what you're saying.
I would like to see, I mean, if you really want some grassroots action in politics, then homie the clown or Bubba the fool, not really, but should be able to run. And if they can't raise $50,000, there should be some form of campaign financing for them, because you're making the ceiling how much money you could raise. The ceiling ought to be something else. What if you had 10,000 signatures? You know.
That's another way of looking at it. All of that has to be vetted out and find out what's the best way to be able to set up a system that allows representation across the community, not the ones who are just well-connected and well-heeled, but across the community. Because I think we all have a contribution to make. And the reason why I ran 4 years ago, I wasn't delusional. I knew I couldn't compete. But I wanted to bring ideas to the table. I wanted to talk about poverty. I wanted to talk about public safety. I wanted to talk about taxes and how it all plays back to poverty. That's why I ran. So
what is the message? I'm going to ask both of you.
Sure.
We have 3 minutes remaining in the show today. Our future. We look at Trayvon. We talk today about all things Trayvon. What would be your suggestion and encouragement to students like Donnie Brown, who was here earlier, recent graduate from Howard University, high school students, college students, and young adults? How can they best conduct their lives in a way that would lift Trayvon Martin up and not make his senseless killing be in vain?
Let me defer to Leo.
Thank you.
You're our guest.
I was getting ready to listen to you, but okay. I would like to see us really use this opportunity as a national launching point and make Florida, the state of Florida, an example of what we can do if we galvanize and not just you know, there's so many things that we can do, but let's focus on Florida. Let's cut them off financially. Let's cut them off with our talent. And then they will see that racism, there's no place for it in 2013. That's what we have to do. Galvanize that support.
The words I use, Rock, very often are aluta continua. The struggle,
What's that?
Aluta continua, or
Okay.
the struggle continues. So many of our folks think we've made it. You know, you have, although you gutted Title V of the Voting Rights Act, we still have a right to vote that we didn't have 50 years ago. We have accommodations laws. There are very few places that can turn you away, country clubs, but very few places that can actually turn you away because of public accommodations. You see African Americans as CEOs, as college professors, as college presidents. So on paper, we've made a lot of progress. But the struggle continues means these young brothers and sisters have to take the baton and move it. Take the baton and pass it on. I would love to see every college campus have a Trayvon Martin club, not necessarily club, but a Trayvon Martin movement. So young people can make it clear that they identify with this young man. I like to see us do 1717 for at least a year. So the 17th of every month, we have people outside mobilized. I'd like to see someone come back in 6 months and say, what was the effect of Trayvon Martin? Boycotted Florida, this many demonstrations, these many stand your ground laws have changed. So I like to really see movement. Usually there's a lot of emotion, as we see now, a lot of anger. That's not going to get you anywhere. Yeah. I mean, it'll get you somewhere, but I just don't want to see people mouth off. Yeah. And, I'm mad, I'm angry, so do something with it. You take pain and you turn it into power and progress. So I think we're all in pain about this verdict, whether we expected the verdict or not. I mean, it's still like a slap in the face yet again. And we've been slapped enough, but so many of us have decided that slapping is okay, that you can be slapped and then we sort of pick ourselves up and dust ourselves off. And the stoic black person, that's a myth and a stereotype. You look at Sabrina Fulton and you look at her, she was extremely stoic. Yes. She was a model.
Tremendous grace under intense pressure.
And when she said Trayvon Benjamin Martin, I just want to jump through the TV and say, yes, sister. Yeah. But at the same time, her stoicism, great for TV, she's crying somewhere.
Yeah. In the words of Ossie Davis, when he eulogized Malcolm X,
that's right.
I would say to those that are listening today, let this young man's seeds be the fruit, bear the fruit of our pain and suffering, and let his being put into the earth. Let that Trayvon Martin tree grow in a way that it bears fruit for the benefit of our community and all communities. Then we will have honored him and not just mourned. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will be back next week, same time, same place, here at Busboys and Poets, 9 a.m. to noon on The Rock Newman Show. Thank you, my guests, Leo Alexander and Dr. Julianne Melba.